and coffee growers, because Annonas weren't being commercially produced down there. So we figured if we just got to be friends with the cacao and coffee farmers, then they might have like a one-off sugar apple tree or something. And that actually was just the case. So these people who had a biodynamic cacao farm, it's called Eco Perlacha in the town of Lama.
Check it.
And they actually were the only place in South America that I've seen a grafted sugar apple tree thus far in my life. Very surprising to find that. And then we continued down from there to Bolivia. That was my second visit, Eric's first visit to Bolivia. And we rented some motorcycles. We kind of knew the lay of the land already from the first visit. So we rented some motorcycles and took off into the bush.
Is that right?
You'll see you've seen photos. I think one of the most striking Annonacea out there is that Dugettia faclatus. Just spectacular. Steve Cucura, our co-founder and partner as well, who had the opportunity to actually taste it. He's the only one of us who tasted it. So between my first trip and the second trip, we actually sent Steve in March. Both of my trips were, let's say, my first one was in January to Bolivia. Second one was in the month of October. So we sent Steve in March when these Dugettias ripen there. And so he's the one who took those images. He says it's the best picture he's ever taken. And so that's why we got motorcycles. We went out to where the trees grow. And that coincided, that was October 2019. That coincided with the big fires down in the Amazon. So wherever we went, there was just smoke, and the sky, the sun was red, and it was just insane. There would be 3 inches of ash smoldering on the ground as we were motorcycling through the bush.
Yeah, it's crazy. Sorry to cut you off, but
No,
there was so much ash on the side of the roads that it almost looked like snow. You know,
is the ash coming from brush clearing or where?
It was raining. It was raining ash, and also from downed trees. So say you have a downed tree, the tree smoldered and just to nothing. It was smoldering there so long that it left from a massive tree trunk just like a 3-inch layer of ash. You know.
But the origins of the fires. We talked to some of the people down there in Santa Cruz, so like the most southern state, you know, kind of the industrial commercial state. But a lot of the people were saying it was just mismanagement of land. So the way the Bolivian politics was working, the president was indigenous. So what people were telling us was they were giving parcels of land to people who were from the mountains, you know, from like the high altitude, and then giving them plots in the lowlands. You know, there was a lot of soy farms, a lot of cattle farms. So people were clearing and cutting and burning. So, and then it just got out of hand because before that, so that was like one of the driest years they had. But before that, they had a huge frost, you know, so it got, some of the Antarctic winds came through and it killed a lot of trees just because you know, the cold. And then so it was like intense cold, intense drought, and then it just fires got crazy.
Yeah absolutely. So we're definitely going to get into that a little bit more, because I think it's of interest to you all to learn more about Dugettia, and there are Annonas from that region that have embedded evolutionary advantage to fires. They actually require fires to restart and grow anew. So I'm definitely going to talk to you all about that. I think that's of interest.
Yeah, especially out there in Cali with all the fires.
Are you going to cover how the Dugettia tasted?
Yeah, I'll definitely talk about, let's see, am I the host? Can I get this?
Yeah, let me switch you over. Sorry about that.
Switch me over. I'll start rolling.
I
think we've got everyone in. Okay. I'm just checking the
Everybody
chat.
can turn off our microphones, so we'll let Marshall have at it, I guess, huh? What time are we?
John, why don't you introduce our
Oh.
presenters again for those that came in later, and give a little heads up.
Yeah, so today we got a special treat all the way from Florida. We got Marshall and Eric. They're co-founders of Annona Breeders. I believe that's the correct title. They've traveled South America, and it sounds like you guys really done a lot of great things, trying to some of the extinct varieties, make them known, and yeah.
Yeah, so let me introduce you to our company. Eric and I have been working on this for 2 years. We are not the first Annona breeding project. I'm in South Florida. I'm sure you all are familiar with Gary Zill and Harmadine's work in the 90s. We'll be definitely delving into their results from their Annona breeding project, because that's who passed us the baton here. And that's where we're kind of starting off with. And so I think their results and the outcomes of their project is very important to learn from. Steve Cucura is someone who we're going to talk more about. He's a co-founder as well. And Eric and I have extensive work growing particularly edible plants. Our main interests when this all started and we started to grow things early on in college were perennial vegetables and fruit trees. And we maintained a botanical collection for the local university, half-acre botanical collection. And during that process, we met Steve Cucura. I don't know how Eric met Steve, but I met him with some colleagues of mine at the time at a tree pruning workshop. So that kicked off Steve and I's relationship, tree pruning. You know, it's
Actually,
crazy
the
how
first
things
time
come
I
together.
met Steve was I was working for an edible landscape company that's no longer around, Florida Edible Landscaping. I met Steve because I was working at a project, just like a home little permaculture garden, but he came and he planted a 45-gallon guanabana. So that was actually, it's kind of full circle now that I think about it. But yeah, it's just, that's the first time I met him. And then after that, started working at Fruitscapes for just work trade for fruit trees, you know, manual labor to take home some trees. And that's kind of how the genetic bank at my house started, and Marshall as well.
Steve offered us, basically we became interns right away, giving up our Saturdays to volunteer out at the nursery. Now, Steve is a plant dad of 300,000 plants. He fits within the largest category of nurseries. He owns and operates a nursery called Fruitscapes, where you can find every variety of every fruit tree that grows down here. Fruitscapes is a very special place. To this day, it is on the same island. We're on a barrier island in Southwest Florida, just outside of Fort Myers. So we're actually we're planting our Annona gene bank on a barrier island, which is a very interesting ecology to work with. So I'm glad Eric mentioned permaculture, because Steve saw that we had a lot to bring to the table as formally trained ecologists. That's what Eric and I got our degrees in, was environmental studies. And so we have a very holistic, unconventional approach. Like Eric mentioned, permaculture. We're also students of syntropic agriculture and so on. That's a little bit about us. I want you to understand we're not conventional. We are ecologists by trade. And so we learn from natural ecosystems, and those are the tenets that we apply in our nursery. We're the only nursery we know of in our area that's actually using living soil with our plants in our potting soil. So that's just a little bit about the company. And generally on a day-to-day basis, we're wholesale only. We supply, a general customer of ours would be an affiliate nursery. That could be a re-wholesaler, or could be open to the public at retail sort of garden center. Also, we fulfill orders of plants that are specifically catering to commercial fruit growers. So in Florida, there's a large citrus industry like there is in California. But because we have various diseases, those citrus groves are being replaced very rapidly. And so we have a lot of commercial fruit growers showing interest in Annonas to replace their citrus fields. And I want to get into the presentation. That's just a general overview. Once again, for those of you who have joined us, I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to speak with you all. More than anything, Eric, Steve, and I want to just open a network of communication and exchange between you all, because we recognize that improving an order of plants is not a small feat that only a group of 3 or 5 people can do. It's going to take a global community to really improve this genus and this order of plants. So without further ado, let's jump right in. I'll share my screen. Everyone seeing this?
Yeah, looks good.
Good, good. Okay. This is an interesting page here. So Eric can tell you more about why his favorite Annona is Anemoia, but before he talks about that, I'll touch on custard apples, because it's probably, for those of you who have tried the Annonas, you know, custard apple may not come to mind as your favorite, but more so than the taste of the fruit and the fruit itself, I have a very special connection to this tree. My life partner, she's Cuban, and her family introduced some genetics of custard apples from Cuba. And when we met, my partner and I, this was sort of like a token of love, and she provided me with these custard apples, which they call chirimoyas. And it was like a life-changing encounter for me. That was my first time trying Annonas. So I associate custard apples, or chirimoyas, you might find me calling them, with my love for my partner, my love for the Caribbean and South Florida. And then beyond that, the flavor is just incredible. So her tree that her father planted at the house here where I'm living at, we call it Havana. And you'll probably see a picture of that here later on. How about you, Eric? Why is Anemoia your favorite Annona?
Honestly, I like the flavor the best. The flavor and the texture. It's hard to actually just pick a favorite. I was talking about this with Marshall last night, that it's, you know, a good sugar apple can beat a bad Anemoia. But yeah, just the performance of how they do in Florida, you know, because they got the cherimoya in there, they're a little more cold hardy, you know, and just they're most of the time they're super vigorous, and they just, yeah, I mean, just flavor, texture, appearance. It originally was Ilama, because for me that was the first, my first out of country trip was after I graduated, so summer of 2017, and that was kind of like my first solo trip. I went to Mexico for 3 months, traveled around the South, you know, just backpacking, taking buses around. But for me, that was like the first fruit that I found, like the first rare Annona that I had found in a marketplace, you know. So I was just, one of the best fruits I found actually was from a tortilla shop. Like, I was staying at this farm that, you know, I had met some connections in Veracruz. So this was in southern Chiapas, so close to Guatemala. And one day, the place I was staying at, I walked outside and I looked across the street from the tortilla shop, and there was a bowl of whitey llamas, you know, white skin, pink on the inside. So for me, that was kind of like the first, you know, just rare fruit find. So I was super stoked on that. So, but it's been such a long time. That was back in 2017, and I haven't had any good llamas. So since then, you know, a lot more Adamoyas.
Great. I love that story. So I figured we would jump right in. I know this was something John and I had specifically touched on, was sugar apples and custard apples. You're seeing all red sugar apples here. Those are of particular interest to us with the Annona Breeding Project because of their color, their beauty. Down below, Sartonea is a custard apple in the bottom left. Rain's red, also custard apple, and then there's the Havana I mentioned. I think it's very interesting. One of the things that motivates me the most in the nursery trade is being able to meet such a diverse group of people. So that's what inspired me to put the names of all from everywhere I could possibly think of. What do people call these fruits? One of my favorites for sugar apple is Palm Canel from the island of Guadalupe, which is in the Caribbean, just north of Trinidad and Tobago, very close to Venezuela. And they call them cinnamon apples, which I find interesting. It's so confusing when you get into the common names of Annonas.
Yeah, that's one thing. Sorry to cut you off, but just like what we've learned from traveling and also just talking with people here in Florida, because there's a lot of Cubans, there's a lot of Mexicans, Guatemalans, a lot of people from Latin America. But if you go to Bolivia, they call everything chirimoya, you know, and then Cubans, they call custard apples chirimoya. So it's the common names. It's just it gets very confusing very fast.
Yeah, in Bolivia, they will call a sugar apple chirimoya normal. They will call a custard apple chirimoya, and they will call a Rolenia chirimoya. They're all the same thing to the Bolivian crowd. I want to mention here, I was very intentional about the varieties that I selected here. So the 3 red sugar apples in the top right, those are Isan Indigo. Those were introduced by a local farmer, very, very close to where Eric and I are at. Him and his wife, Luke and Savannah Lasley, go to Thailand regularly. And so this was a selection that they're beginning to propagate now. They brought the seeds back from Thailand, they grew it out to fruit, and they're beginning to start propagating this through grafting at their little humble home nursery. So every single variety you see here has not been introduced to the nursery trade at this point in time. It is only just now starting to be propagated on a very small scale. And one of our core missions as the Annona Breeding Project is to get these high quality genetics out into the world on a large scale. So these beautiful, beautiful cultivars you see in front of you, there's only like one mother tree of these around, and they have not been spread. That's why it's so important to back these up in several different gene banks, because the single mother tree can get wiped out instantly if a hurricane comes or a flood comes or some other extreme weather event like cold. Now, Adamoyas, so Bradley is being cultivated. It was an introduction out of Miami-Dade County from the private sector. And the way we got our hands on Bradley was because the USDA has what's called the GRIN database. And the GRIN database allows you to look at basically what genetic material, all the accessions that have been submitted to the USDA at any USDA field station. I believe it's Riverdale, California, or I could be wrong on, or Davis, that has like the world's repository of pomegranates. And down here in South Florida, over in Coral Gables, which is the Miami area, they have a repository for tropical and subtropical fruits and palms, things like that, some ornamentals. Now, in addition to the USDA, there's the state extension system that also offers genetic material. And so the stuff you see here, we do have our hands on it. We've either gotten our hands on it through the nursery trade, or we've gotten our hands on it through the USDA, or from the University of Florida, from visiting the various gene banks around South Florida and collecting the scions and grafting them ourselves. There aren't very many pictures. When you try to look up Annonas, it's unfortunate that there's so much confusion. We're hoping that one day when our website is fully functioning, our website will house like an Annonapedia, all the information, the stories behind each individual cultivar, and everything that we know at this point in time about the various cultivars and their performance and taste and so on. But up to this point, you know, it's very tough to find pictures of a Bradley and know specifically that it is a Bradley. So I wanted to include that one because that was one that you all probably aren't going to see too often, but it's just a spectacularly gorgeous fruit. It looks like the most beautiful sugar apple you've ever seen. And you can only tell that it's an Atemoya once you cut into the fruit and you see how firm the pulp is on the inside. The trees do have somewhat of an Atemoya habit to them, and Atemoya type leaves as well. I know you all are familiar with African Pride and Geffner because they're in commercial cultivation out there. Before I move on, I know we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So I just want to take like 45 seconds for anyone who has questions to write those down. Or if it's something quick, we can cover it right now if anyone has something to ask.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the cold sensitivity of the sugar apples.
Do you know that off the top of your head, Eric?
Not the exact degrees. I know they definitely don't like below freezing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking relative to cherimoyas, which seem pretty adaptable out here in Southern California. So,
Yeah.
I mean, but whereas Atemoya seems a little more sensitive, and I didn't know where sugar wrapper fell on that.
Less sensitive.
Yeah, so we actually, Robin, great question. We witnessed that extreme once in a lifetime freeze event. I don't know if you had been in, Robin, as I wasn't keeping track of names when we discussed this most recent trip to Bolivia, where there was a once in a lifetime freeze event. It occurred in August of 2019, and it was from an extreme. They get extreme sort of polar vortices down there, just like we do here in North America. Theirs come out of Antarctica, the Argentina and Tierra del Fuego region. And that sent the temperatures there down to 4 degrees Celsius, which I'm not sure exactly what that translates to in Fahrenheit. Probably somewhere like 34 to 36 degrees Fahrenheit is what I would say. And the sugar apples died at 4 degrees Celsius. Now down here, we've seen them take like 34 degrees. Bolivia is in the true tropics. It's 18 degrees south of the equator. So I think those trees got shocked with a once in a lifetime cold event. But I think they're being in North America, being in the subtropics, they'll tend to be more hardy, because they survived an equivalent temperature here in South Florida, whereas they didn't survive in Bolivia. Interesting observation. I've never actually put that together until now. Does that answer your question, Robin? I'm sorry I couldn't give you an exact.
Well, just for the record, I just checked, and 4 degrees centigrade is 39.2 Fahrenheit. So
Okay.
Quite a bit above freezing, actually.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so we've seen them get to 34 here on Pine Island.
Yeah. Just a real quick look up. IFAS, they say 30 to 32 mature trees can handle like 29 for brief periods of time.
Well,
So
that sounds
we've
like Southern
Yeah.
California.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically here. If you have a mature tree, it'll do okay. If it's a young one, it's going to be tender for many species, even local species.
yeah. How cold does it get down there? Over there. Like
Well,
what's the lowest?
San Diego is pretty weird because we have, I think last I checked, we have 13 sunset western zones here, and you only have to go a few miles for some pretty radical temperature changes. So you can't really say San Diego. There's a
Yeah.
city of San Diego, and then there's the county, and many of us fruit growers live in slightly inland regions, which get a little colder than the city of San Diego, but we also get a bit warmer. So we're more likely to maybe get that frost, but it's usually not a killing frost.
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
it's
that's actually
we're not as mild as Florida.
It's actually pretty similar, the dynamics here. I mean, obviously, the closer to the coast, the warmer you are. So luckily, we're on the island. So over the past few years that me and Marshall have been doing this, we've only seen it get down to like mid 30s, thankfully. But yeah, the further inland you go, like I think about a month or so ago, 5 weeks or whatever, there was places in Central Florida that got down to, like mid 20s. That's why most, like if you look at a map of Florida, the middle is mainly citrus. And once you go to the edges and then South Florida, that's where people start getting into the tropicals.
Yeah, I've been to Florida, but one big difference here is elevation. So
Yeah.
you're flat. Your whole state is flat, but we're not flat.
You don't know till you try.
Yeah. And that's exactly, I mean, when people ask me stuff like that, I just tell them to try it, see what you can get away with. I've seen some crazy microclimates that people do, like just I do deliveries for Fruitscapes. So it's like I get to drive around Florida a lot, but, I've seen some crazy setups where people manage to keep stuff warm. So
This is Dave Sohn. I'm about 5 miles east of where Steve and Robin are, and kind of a little bit elevated. I guess we're on a slight bench, so to speak. And I have an Adamoya that fruits. It fruits more than the Cherimoya does, and which is amazing to me. But it gets freezing here, and we get frost periodically.
And has the Adamoya seems fine with the frost that you experienced, David?
It has one year. I don't know about this year. We've had a very mild winter. We haven't even hardly gone down to the chill factor area of 45 degrees. But last year it fruited, and we had frost twice in the spring.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting how, I don't know exactly what the dynamics are with Annonas and how cold stimulates them. I haven't done too much research into Cherimoyas, but that's definitely a challenge that we face. I'm going to talk to you about this a little later on when we get into David Fairchild's articles, how the original Annona introduction to southern Florida was entirely killed by a freeze. So definitely a huge hurdle to overcome for anyone interested in growing Annonas is how to protect our trees from those severe low temperatures. And I just want to check, John, are you admitting these people in who are joining?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Keep it up pretty good.
Good. Just wanted to double check.
Sure.
So I'm glad we were able to touch on cold here because I was kind of segueing into challenges. One of the, aside from cold, which is a seasonal challenge that we face maybe 3 or 4 months out of the year, sucking insects are something that take place all year round, and you'll become very accustomed for those of you who haven't started growing Annonas yet, to seeing mealy bugs on the fruits, to seeing aphids on the leaves. The Annona sap is very tasteful to many different sucking insects. You might see a lot of ants farming on your trees. So definitely something to keep in mind going into starting to grow Annonas. You want to have some sort of protocol for dealing with those and have a toolbox of different things that you can use. Typically, Eric and I, like I was saying, we're ecologists by trade, so we're going to use like horticultural oil. Horticultural oil is basically like a vegetable oil that's made for the agricultural field. And so we use that in conjunction with soap. And we'll use that in conjunction with neem oil. Something that I find very effective is cedar oil. There's a type of cedar oil called cedar side. That's very good. And then one of the other biggest things that you're going to face is minor mineral deficiencies. Oftentimes, the first hurdle that folks who are purchasing trees, Annona trees from nurseries, will face is that their trees look really healthy at the nursery, and then they start the slow decline when the person who purchased the tree plants the trees. And that's often due to minor mineral deficiencies, specifically for Anemonas, magnesium. You'll start to see the leaves yellowing. The indication that you have a mineral deficiency is the symmetrical
pattern in the leaf
appearance. Yeah. And this is, I included a picture here. This is a Charlotta tree from our breeding grove. And this is just this was not a minor mineral deficiency in the soil. This was just a seasonal sort of fall situation. So the tree was sequestering nutrients to preserve for when the new growth was pushed and to preserve for dormancy. So this is what you see here is a mineral deficiency, but it's a seasonal mineral deficiency. And what Eric and I find ourselves using regularly is Epsom salts, which will take care of your magnesium. You can use azomite, but you don't want to use too much because that can cause your soil to become more basic. Just something to be aware of.
Yeah, down here in Florida, I mean, just like at my house is about an hour from Pine Island, but the soil here is just pure sugar sand, so a lot of those minerals are just non-existent. I mean, because millions of years ago used to be underwater. So as the water receded back, it's just like that pure beach sand. So constantly just throwing Epsom salts. Here, tons of mulch. And the picture that Marshall's got in the presentation, the fungal blight, we've seen just like if you use a really dense potting mix, known as a problem we face here, another one that's not on the list for us is just too much water. Sugar apples, custard apples, like they like plenty of water, but for just because the elevation for us, our grove is at 12, it's like 12 or 13 feet sea level. So when in the summertime, when we get our torrential downpours, standing water is a huge thing because it'll just rot the roots out, and then you'll see the tree just drop leaves, turn yellow, and then just slowly wither away.
So great addition, Eric. Thank you very much. On the topic of minor mineral deficiencies, for those of you who get a tree from a nursery, keep this in mind. The trees from the nursery are loaded with everything that they need and all the nutrients, all the minor minerals. But when it gets to your house, it's not the same situation. You need to feed it the minor minerals, and that's probably going to be the first thing, your first roadblock if you start to see your tree declining, is the minor minerals. Now, something else I want to touch on with minor minerals is that Annonas will not set fruit if they do not have certain minor minerals present to create seeds. And some of the minerals that they need to create seeds are boron, zinc, calcium, and those minerals need to be applied before the tree starts to flower in order to see your healthy, nice, high yield fruit production that season. So especially when you're experimenting with new hybrids that tend to be less productive in the first place, you definitely want to be spraying with some minor nutrient blend when your trees begin flushing new growth after dormancy and start to flower, because they just won't produce fruit if they don't have the zinc and the calcium that they need to make the seeds.
Hey, Marshall, what's that, the liquid soluble seaweed that you picked up?
That is, it's a brand called Maxi Crop, MAXICROP. It's available from simplyorganic.com by the pound. And that's really good. 0016. So it's got a lot of potassium, and then it has like 64 minor minerals, and it's from kelp harvested out of the Baltic Sea. I'm not a salesperson for them, but it's just a really good organic product. This is the fungal blight that Eric pointed out is actually anthracnose. So for those of you who grow mangoes, you're familiar with anthracnose. That can be prevented by using, a copper spray when the fruits start to size up. Usually it doesn't progress too badly unless you're just really lackluster about harvesting your fruit and you're letting the fruit stay on there really long for the spores to start to spread around your tree. So an easy way to avoid the anthracnose, because Eric and I don't use fungicide routinely, is just to stay on top of harvesting your fruit when the time comes. And then the bane of the Annona grower's existence is this chalcid wasp.
To pause before you go on that, Marshall.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good practice to prevent, copper fungicide usage, because there are people that say it builds up in the soil over time. So what I do, like in the home grove and at the Annona grove, is neem treatments. If you're spraying every couple weeks, pretty consistently, I just use, there's a product called Triact. I'm actually not sure if you can get it retail, but it's a mixture between neem oil and a couple other oils. But oils mixed with cast iron soaps. Make sure you're spraying in the morning and the evening so you don't burn your trees. I've definitely made that mistake before, but and then so it's better to be preventative, to make sure your tree is fed, to make sure your tree, use something less harsh like that. But then if you do still get that fungus on there, that's when you would use the copper. It's best to be preventative for everything. So.
Yeah, speaking of prevention, bag the fruits of your custard apples. Custard apples are probably hands down the number one go-to for the chalcid wasp. The chalcid wasp is actually looking for the shape of the scales, and that's how it hones in on the fruit, is the shape of the scales. So I'm experimenting with new bags this year, because the way I got that photo was that thing was inside the bags that I put on there last year. So obviously it was able to get through. So I'm experimenting with new bags that are not transparent, whereas last year I used mesh transparent bags to cover up that shape of the scales.
Are you talking about the insect that's in the palm of your hand?
Yes, precisely. Annona seed borer is another common name aside from.
They look for the shape of the scale, and then they use their ovipositor to inject those seeds into this or inject their eggs into the seed. So
Interesting though, like I said, they target specifically custard apples. You'll see them in guanabanas. Atemoyas they do not hit, and so it seems to be the case that once the Annona fruit, once the seed pocket in the Annona fruit becomes consolidated and there's enough pulp between the skin of the fruit and the seeds of the fruit, the ovipositor is no longer capable of penetrating deep enough into the seed. So something that if we're breeding and selecting for more concentrated seed pockets, which has always been a goal of Annona breeding, is to eliminate as many seeds as possible, possibly make something seedless, then your chalcid wasp issue becomes obsolete at that point. That's why you don't see them hitting like elamas, for example. The shell is too hard. Atemoyas, the pulp is too thick. And I suspect the same case with Charlotta. We're about to get onto Charlotta here not too long, because the seed to pulp ratio is excellent. There's way too much pulp. The chalcid wasp can't penetrate it. Eric, you got anything to add before we move to the next one?
I think you
Got it.
nothing I got.
Cool. This was a transformative article for me. Steve Cucura gave this to Eric and I several years ago, and it's one of David Fairchild's final writings submitted to the Florida State Horticultural Society. He says that he was encouraged to speak on this final writing because he was hoping to encourage young folks, like-minded folks like us, to get into this field of investigation, the field of improvement of tropical fruits suited to the culture in Florida. Back in as early as 1912, we had individuals in Florida who were grafting custard apples onto pond apples. In fact, that experiment occurred on Pine Island where Eric and I are doing our experimentation. So this is over 100-year-old heritage that we are participating in. And I thought it was interesting to include this. You get a sense of Dr. David Fairchild's taste here when he says that the custard apple is inferior to the cherimoya or the sugar apple in quality. So him and I would disagree on that. And he says that Annona breeding is one of the most fascinating fields for the plant breeder, for the potential that all these species can hybridize with one another. And he even went so far as to try and cross the native pond apple to Florida with the guanabana, and he said all his attempts had failed. Cherimoya is very finicky here, very difficult to grow here. And according to Fairchild at the time, the experiments with cherimoya was that it just couldn't fruit at sea level. It was incapable of fruiting at sea level. And so thus began a breeding effort to try and cross cherimoya with sugar apple to make a cherimoya hybrid that would actually produce here in Florida. Ed Simmons, the progenitor of the Simmons avocado, was attempting this cherimoya sugar apple cross. He had already budded sugar apple on pond apple at the time and designated the hybrid as Atemoya. And according to Fairchild, he thought that hybrid Atemoya would be a great starting point to begin breeding because of its hybrid character. At that point, it had been grafted onto Atemoya. Atemoya had been grafted on pond apple. And here's what I had mentioned earlier with the Great Freeze of 1917. The entire collection of Annonas in Florida, except for an elama, was killed to the ground at 26.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So, Robin, going back to your question earlier, 26.5 is definitely a threshold point. But it's very interesting that elama was capable of surviving that.
Yeah, that's, I mean, just to point out, that last part Marshall showed me last night when we were going over this, and I thought it was just super interesting, because the llama here in Florida doesn't do too great. The leaf, you know, right around spring, when they'll flush out, they'll look nice and beautiful, but you know, I think they just prefer a climate that might be a little cooler and with a little more elevation. Because they always seem, just the ones that I've grown personally, they always seem to get like a, you know, rust on the leaves. It's like impossible to prevent. But keeping in mind the cold tolerance, it interests me to cross it with something else, you know, that might, like a reticulata, for example, just to get it. We'll go more into that later, the hybrids and the different characteristics of them. But that's just something that interests me, getting the thick-skinned llama, crossing it with the very thin-skinned custard apple, but getting the vigor from the custard apple into something that might produce better for us in Florida. So that's definitely something that ideas we've been shooting around. But continue, Marshall.
Yeah, so he says, as mentioned, custard apple can be grafted onto pond apple and should be given extensive trial by someone with the requisite initiative and capital. And this field is an immense one. The doors are open to it for the reception of plant lovers of this coming generation. Would that I might turn back the dial of time, bring back the brown hair to my head, lengthen the working days of daylight, shorten the interrupting, disturbing factors of social obligations, and with my old friends start in to gather about me the relatives of these superb fruits, which someday might be welded into forms that the world has never dreamed could be produced. And that was the kick in the rear end that I needed to get started on my journey. So here we are. We have Harmadine's paper, Harmadine and Gary Zill, General Observations on Hybridizing Annona Species. We're going to start to get into the nitty gritty here. What are our breeding objectives with Annonas? And we want to clearly outline that. Color is a huge, huge, huge one. Commercial fruit growers, especially something becoming very, very popular lately. I don't know if you all have observed this happening in Southern California as well, but certainly in Florida, a lot of our commercial fruit growers are switching their modus operandi. They're going into more of a situation where they're sending boxes, they're shipping boxes of fruits all around the world and marketing and advertising their brands entirely online. So it's a situation where commercial growers are sending their products direct to the consumer. And so analyzing and interviewing commercial growers who we're partners with, one of the main things that they want us to focus on is the appearance of the fruits, because the appearance is what sells them on the platforms that these growers are using, like social media. So color, how do you achieve color when you're hybridizing these fruits? It's possible to attain good flesh and skin color by breeding Atemoyas with any colorful custard apple varieties. This hybrid's flesh colors can be as intense as the custard apple or even more intense than the custard apple, as you can see with 47-18, which was a Geffner hybridized with a San Pablo. And San Pablo's underneath next to that 47-18. Now, transmission of flesh color to Cherry Lotta hybrids, which, for example, 75-9, a Spain Cherimoya crossed with a Canole custard apple, is good, but it's much rarer to come across a Cherry Lotta seedling that attains that good color. As you can see with 75-9, it's really not bright, very dull. In fact, that's what that's what the painter Cherry Lotta looks like. So that 75-9 might have been picked early, underripe. That's what an underripe painter Cherry Lotta looks like right there. It's only the last couple days of ripening where it develops a really bright color on the outside that you can automatically tell that Cherry Lotta, that painter, is ready to be picked. So very interesting. Basically, you take an Attamoya, cross it with a colorful custard apple, and your chances of achieving a colorful seedling are very high. Cherryladas, much less so. More of a
Which
lottery.
I know. To answer Jorge's question in the comments about can cherimoya be accepted on Attamoya, that's actually something we haven't tried. Unless you've tried it, Mark.
Oh yeah. We've got one at Fruitscapes. I put Fino de Jete onto a that one 30-gallon Attamoya there in the front.
Okay.
So yes, the answer is yes, for sure. Although Jorge, I do have to put a caveat there. Only one of them has taken in my whole life. I've only tried that, maybe a half dozen times, and one of them took. So certain Attamoya varieties may be better than others, but that one did work. We used what we call Tim. It's an Australian type. So moving on, we're going to talk about what are the other breeding objectives, because color is only just one of them. And it's going to be a talk on productivity. We want, as you know, a lot of Annonas, the best Annonas sometimes require hand pollination, which is very, very laborious work. Commercial growers, not something most of them are committed to. Huge labor cost for them to be doing that.
But that seems so far. Sorry, Marcia.
No, go ahead, Eric. Go ahead.
From our conversations with Dr. Jonathan Crane down at the Trek Research Station from University of Florida, they've done experiments with sugar apples, looking at natural pollination versus hand pollination versus certain hormones.
Induced, yeah.
Yeah, so they would go through and I forgot exactly what it was.
They got natitolid beetles. They attracted natitolid beetles to the field using rotting fruit.
Yeah, so they were doing that, and just from their experiments and their data that they collected, hand pollination was still the best. They, at the time, he said that they had been in contact with some growers down in Brazil that were experimenting with the spraying method. So I'm not sure what the status of that is now, but they've already done a lot of legwork. So hand pollination is just, if we can breed that out, that would be ideal, but takes time.
Yeah. Very interesting study that Jonathan Crane had mentioned. You'd think that attracting natitolid beetles, as many natitolid beetles as possible, and they were using a pheromone in addition to the rotting fruit, you'd think that would be the best option, the most naturally sound option, but it was not. There was by far better results with hand pollination. So
better shaped fruit and just more fruit. You get the nice even shape, because when the beetles do it, it's not their job to do it. Well, it is their job, but they're not going for perfection.
You'll have one of those wonky Lisas in that basket down there. So Attamoya hybrids and Attiladas, which I've also heard as Tamoyladas, there's not an agreement there yet, but for the purposes of this meeting, Eric and I, we tend to call them Attiladas. Those tend to flower and fruit several years earlier than do Cherryladas. It's not surprising, though, because sugar apple seedlings normally fruit after 6 months or 3 years. There is a cherimoya seedling, though, that Harmadine had grown after 5 years, had gotten to fruit. But in the experience of Florida growers, they've spent 10 or even more than 15 years trying to fruit cherimoya. We're just so far out of their climate zone, so far out of their natural elevation that it's just pushing the limit too much for true cherimoyas here. You're happy.
Yeah.
You're lucky if you get a flower a year to use for pollen.
We know I only know one person that has fruited cherimoya in Florida. They're also on Pine Island, but they just call it Spain. It's a seedling that was introduced, but the tree's got to be, I don't know, 15 years old or whatever, but it just rarely makes fruit. It's just not, most of the time it's just not
teetering on the edge of death.
Yeah. So again, that's where the hybrids come in.
So you have coming in as the early winners, sort of the quickest to fruit, sugar apples after 6 months to 3 years. And we have images of a 6-month-old sugar apple in a 1-gallon pot with a fruit on it, which just blows my mind. And then you have custard apples, which take a little bit longer. Those are 3 to 5 years, a little bit slower. Now, Harmadine speaking on his 9-year-old Cherylata hybrids at the time, and this was all in the 90s, remember, with 4 to 6 inch diameter trunks, had not flowered at the time. After 9 years, the Cherylatas had not flowered. And then, interesting note here, breeding the most precocious selections from the first generation with each other produce very precocious second generations of hybrids. Now, moving on to productivity. So they may produce a whole bunch of flowers, but that doesn't mean those flowers are actually going to set fruit. Many hybrids that flowered haven't held any fruit to maturity, even though they were hand pollinated for 2 or 3 seasons. Most hybrids produce very sparsely, and a few hybrids will occasionally produce so much that they need severe thinning. And some of those examples were Lisa, which is 4826, and then the 47-18 that we saw in the previous slide. Now, in terms of tree vigor, Cherylatas were the most vigorous in the ZIL breeding project. And the other extreme, the least vigorous, was sugar apples crossed with elamas, germinated by the hundreds and all died at 2 inches.
Yeah, to go back to how just the timing with seedlings and fruit, like from seed to fruit, that's one of the things that draws me to Annonas. I know Marshall as well, and Steve. It's just when you're on fruit tree time, 6 months to a few years is short. That's one of the beauties of Annonas, is just the time it takes. By the time it takes for you to grow out a mango seedling to get a new variety, you could double that with Annonas. You can get 2 new fruits by the time it takes you to get 1 new mango. So that's just that's one of the things I'm super interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, as Fairchild pointed out, that they're very they have an affinity for interspecies hybridization. So like out in the Yucatan, you find them just naturally hybridizing, and in fact that's where this M1 comes from, is the Yucatan. It was either a seedling from a fruit found in the market there, or it could have come from a research station. But that's from a tree that was planted in the 90s on Pine Island, and it produces like 1 or 2 fruits a year if you get any.
Yeah, and you wouldn't be able to tell at first glance that it looks like a hybrid, because Steve, he worked at Treehouse, which was the original like OG fruit nursery that was on Pine Island, and Bob and Vivian Murray, the ones who had brought that in, he thought the tree died. So it looks very, very similar to a sugar apple, but the leaves are slightly more defined, like a custard apple. But it just makes these massive fruits that the flavor was a little watered down, but it's just, I don't even know where I was going with that.
No, so moving on. speaking about Steve and Treehouse, you know, Steve has over 20 years experience in the nursery trade here in South Florida, propagating fruit trees. And unlike most college graduates who might go into, like, let's say, personal trainer or graphic design and go off and work for a company who have to sign like a non-compete agreement, Steve was like, no, there's no non-competes here. Actually, if you think of a business idea, let's get it started. You know, we want you to benefit from Fruitscapes. And so from the very beginning, he was very generous, and wanted us to start something new, something novel. And we've been talking a lot about grafting certain species onto a different species of rootstock. Steve's the one who originally taught us how to graft to begin with, and we started by getting some custard apple wood, and then he gave us the custard apple seedlings, and we sat right there one of those Saturdays that we were volunteering at the fruit stand and nursery, and he taught us how to graft right then and there. And so you'll see here a 2-year-old pond apple. Actually, it's a cherry lotta tree with a pond apple stalk. So that's a native pond apple stalk there, that graft you see with the cherry lotta on top. And how have we managed to grow true cherimoyas after all of this, Eric and I saying that they're not vigorous and they don't fruit here, is that we use cherry lotta interstock on the native pond apple. So we actually use cherry lotta as an interstock to get our cherimoyas to grow. And that seems to be doing very well with our 1-year-old cherimoya grafts. Now behind Steve, this picture is going to come up again on the left side. The vertical photo is Steve on that March 2017 trip. March 2019 trip to Bolivia, when we sent him there on a solo mission to get the Dugettia faclatus. That is a Dugettia faclatus tree he's standing next to. You'll see more images of that tree coming up. I do just want to draw that comparison, though, between David Fairchild's encouragement of younger generations and Steve's encouragement of younger generations to really take the baton and do something that inspires them and gives them the energy to wake up in the morning. Steve's not our only mentor, though. We're blessed to have John Painter right next door. He's just a couple blocks from our operation, who has been doing this for a whole lifetime, really. And the creation story of the painter cherry lotta is just like the fruit breeders ethos. It's like all you need is one. You know, all you need is one to make it, and that one can change everything. John grew out, he hybridized many cherry lottas, planted all the seeds from the fruits that were hand pollinated with the pollen from the Tikal custard apple there. And every single one died except for the painter tree, which he has planted.
So this was in a little back context. This was in 2004, I believe, when Hurricane Charlie came through and wrecked Florida. Pine Island was hit. They were devastated, you know, just so in his...
There was actually a barrier island. We're actually protected by 2 other barrier islands, and the one to the north split in 2. So whereas we were protected by 2 barrier islands, the one that split into 2, now we have 3 protective barrier islands. So that hurricane actually was so strong that it split an island in half.
Yeah. So John, he was just too busy. He manages, was it like 14 acres by himself?
Yeah.
He's been in the same spot for almost 30 years. So he's best for grower, hands down, that I know out on Pine Island. But he was just too busy taking care of the grove, you know, trying to do damage control. All of the seedlings had died from neglect. except for that one. And then the one, how long did it take them to make fruit from the seedling? You remember?
It required hand pollination for many, many years. I want to say like 5 or 6 years required hand pollination to set. And with hand pollination, it was very finicky. It was not precocious. However, after time, the tree became more and more productive. And up to now, I mean, this season, he must have had like 80 or so on the one tree. You
And
can
we just
see,
want to
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Eric.
I was going to say, we just want to point out the bottom pictures. You can see the charlotte is totally submerged in water. The bottom right, it's planted up in Punta Gorda, so it's actually a little north of Pine Island. It gets a little more chilly, but you can see it's just it's grafted on the pond apple rootstock, and we saw this tree get covered. One of the things that I had heard was if you graft a tree on pond apple and it gets flooded above the graft union, that it'll kill the tree. But the tree on the bottom left, that's at the Fruitscapes pond, and that thing was sitting underwater for at least 5 weeks with the graft union submerged. And same thing with the other one, the other tree on the bottom right, just totally submerged. I mean, that just blew me away. But in our experience, something I had heard didn't turn out to be true. So that's the importance of try it yourself. You never know, So.
Yeah, not to mention, so that pond on the left, the Fruitscapes pond, is stagnant. It's not flowing. It's fresh. Now on the right side, that's brackish. That's salty water, and that's moving, constantly moving, but it's also constantly submerged. You see the pictures of the fruit, and I'll touch on the seed to pulp ratio, just how few seeds you see in there and how thick the pulp is. Also the color too, coming from that custard apple, that Tikal custard apple. And then the precocity on the top right. One terminus of flowers, and you get that much. You can actually see the seaweed, the kelp spray in that photo too.
Yeah, so I think the most fruit that we've seen was like on that cluster of flowers, we had seen like 8 or 9 fruits set. Of course, I mean, the tree dropped most of them, but just to see that much fruit set was very surprising. And it's got those cluster-like flowers from the custard apple. But to go back to the texture, the cherimoya cross gives it that nice, firm, chewy flavor, which is another reason why I want to cross more cherimoyas down here.
Yeah,
just for texture.
Yeah, no stone cells. It's hard to believe, but there are no stone cells, seriously. And there's also a sub-acid flavor that's brought out by the cherimoya. That's really delicious, not found in the custard apples for sure. And you
Stone
can
cells
see,
are for the people that don't know, they're the grit, so why they call sugar apple.
yeah, and that's also something you'll find in pears as well as stone cells, especially back when pears were in their wild form or just becoming domesticated. They were full of stone cells, I hear. And you can tell, it has that reticulata in it from the form of the flowers. But really outstanding and just beautiful. You can tell it has the cherimoya in it right away when you see the gold fuzz on the new growth, the little thumb prints, as opposed to the scales you find on a custard apple. This has those cherimoya thumb prints on it. So yeah, the painter cherylata. We talked about M1. There's also another hybrid here that John's made, and Eric and I were going over this slideshow last night, and this is the first time we had actually seen these two side by side. And you can start to pull out and discriminate what makes a sugar lotta. And I know there are some folks in Southern California calling them saramoyos. That's a name for them found by the indigenous in Yucatan. So if you're in the Yucatan looking for these, you might want to call them saramoyos. But you can see that pink characteristic around the scales. And thus far, Eric had mentioned that it was watered down. Both of these have a very watered down, a lot of juice, sugar apple flavor, and they don't have very much characteristic of the custard apple at this point in time, except for that pink around the scales. And then I know Eric's, when he had tasted the M1, had mentioned that it did have a little bit of firm flesh to it.
Yeah, it was like one of the guys, Elijah, at the fruit stand, he brought it in from Treehouse, from the original tree. So he was kind enough to share it. But yeah, it was just sugar apple flavor mostly, with like a slight berry flavor that you get in some of the custard apples, like Sartonea, strong berry flavor. But like Marshall had mentioned, it was watered down. So I'm not sure if it's just so sugar lotta is squamosa crossed with reticulata, for those who might miss that. Sugar apple, custard apple. But I mean, gorgeous fruits. You can see, looks like a dinosaur egg. And the pulp, the skin was incredibly thick, like it was ripe, but it kind of cracks when it opens. Large sections, tons of meat, and all the seeds seemed viable, which is interesting, because just from our experience with Atemoyas, you get half of the viable seed. The other ones just, they just rot, turn, just super squishy. These, they all seem super firm, super viable. So something else to consider when making hybrids.
I think it's interesting to note here that whereas the custard apple is very susceptible to chalcid wasp, here you don't see any chalcid wasp damage. So it seems like sugar apple genetics can help influence chalcid wasp hardiness. Just an observation there. Here's Eric's original favorite. So those pictures on the left are from Steve's trip to El Salvador. I'm trying to remember. It was September 2019. While it was in conjunction with Eric and I's trip to Peru. So Eric and I were in Peru at the time that Steve went ahead and pulled the trigger and went to El Salvador. Drawing upon local contacts, he was able to find Sancoya on that trip, and he was able to find Ilama. Steve's recommendation was that the white ones were the best. So for those of you who haven't tried the native pond apple, it has a very aromatic, almost like soapy flavor to it. It's not palatable.
Smells the fruit, so pond apples, they look great, smell great, but when you bite into it, it's just not.
It's like when your mother forces you to eat soap when you're a kid, and after you say something mean. That's what the pond apple tastes like. So what Steve had described those white skin, pink pulped Ilamas was that they did have that sort of gamey Annona pond apple muskiness to it. Same thing with Sancoya. And so there's when he was in El Salvador, he had only come across a single Sancoya tree in someone's home garden that was palatable. All the ones in the ravines along riversides that were growing in the wild in the jungle were not palatable. And it's interesting because Steve and Eric have a difference of opinion here on the white and pinky llamas, because we know Eric loved them. So whereas Eric prefers the ones that are pink on the inside, Steve preferred the ones that are white on the inside.
Yeah, just from my limited experience, the ones that I was finding, so that I found two different ones. And this is in southern Mexico, like southern Chiapas, close to Guatemala. But The white ones that I found in the marketplace, like you can see in the pictures below, they were cracked open. And like that's how people knew when to pick them, was when they were cracked. That was the white flesh, green skinned, but the pink ones I had, white skinned, pink flesh, those ones weren't cracked at all. They were picked perfectly, great shape. And I actually preferred the ones that were pink on the inside. To me, it reminded me of guanabana with, again, that slight raspberry flavor like a Charlotta has, but more dry. But just a side note, I want to ask if anybody's growing llamas out there in Cali and if they've had good success. Feel free to speak up.
We've got a couple growers of the Cherimoya and the Atamoya in Raleigh. Yeah, the varieties they grow is pretty amazing.
We have in North County Nino Cupoliano's orchard of Cherimoya, mostly the Fortuna variety, and they hand pollinate them using a sprayer. I'm trying to think I wish Stephanie were on here because she's worked with that orchard an awful lot, but they market them and they're in kind of Vista area, inland from the ocean, probably 3 miles or something. And they put out a very, very prolific crop.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing.
I started a Cherimoya tree from seed from my father-in-law, and it took about 2.5 years, and it is about 15 feet tall, and it produces, and I do not pollinate it at all. It's all self-pollinating by the bees and everything else. And it still produces a decent crop without doing anything to it.
Very cool. Where was the seed from originally?
My father-in-law, who lives north of LA, he has a tree. Yeah. And we took the seeds out of one of his fruits, and I just planted like 3-4 seeds, and the one that took off the best I planted, and it's growing, and I live next to a riverbed. So it's getting that real moist soil, clay soil, and it loves it. It's just growing like crazy.
Very cool. That's great to hear.
Great. I love to hear everyone's experiences. This is Guillermo specifically. They both look a little bit different. I think it's because of the lighting. They're also coming from different crops. The middle image is from several years ago. The one on the right is from this past season here in Florida, this past summer. Something I observed yesterday. Now, I have very little experience with llama. I draw upon Eric's experience down in Chiapas quite often. But something that I noticed was that you can actually see the pink pulp underneath the skin. Like it almost there's almost like that pink comes through, and you can see it from the outside on both of these pictures. The one on the right being much harder to tell, but it's still kind of there. Now there in Mexico, there's a coalition of Annona growers, and we've referenced the field station where the M1 could have possibly come from there in the Yucatan. So that's definitely a group of individuals we want to communicate with and look forward to working with and getting to know them. They do put out publications. This is one of their publications here on the diversity of llamas. Highly recommend, if you're interested at all in llamas, to look this up. It's available on the web. So write down the authors, the first author and the name of the article, because it is a very comprehensive article or manuscript. It's about like 60 pages, and it goes through all these different phenotypes of llamas, from the flowers to the leaves to the fruits. I mean, just very, very comprehensive research they're doing there. There's very few places in the world that have dedicated Annona breeding projects. So we have this unit of growers in Mexico. There's a site in Israel where they do breeding. There's another site in Australia. And then other than that, in the whole entire world, it's just us here in Florida and you all there in California. And
Side
as
note,
I
Marshall,
was
do you
just
know
gonna
if that
say,
paper's in English and Spanish, or is it just in Spanish?
I think it's just in Spanish. There's a lot of pictures though, and I'm sure with modern day translation technology, it'd be pretty easy to get over into English.
Yeah, it's 60 pages long, but it's mostly pictures. So don't be intimidated.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I've never seen such a collection before. And Steve, he actually had planned on going to that place. He was just going to show up. But then he ended up going to Bolivia with Marshall instead. So it kind of worked out. And the person he talked to said that the area that it was in is it's known for being dangerous, so it just worked out. I happened to go to Bolivia instead.
Rollinia. So the reason we have sort of intentionally focused on the species that we have been focused on is because these are the Annonas that pretty much get the most airtime. Guanabana being the exception that I did not include here in this presentation. But these get the most airtime, the ones we've spoken on, and I would say in my experience have been the most flavorful, the most enjoyable, the most prolific, the easiest to get your hands on in the nursery trade or to get seeds from online or what have you, or traveling. So that's why we've particularly focused on these species here. And Rollinia is really special to me. On my first trip, the picture here on the left was my first trip to Bolivia back in October 2019, and then January 2019. The other pictures from September 2019 in Peru. And so the ones there on the left are Bolivian, the one on the right is Peruvian. Rollinia is absolutely incredible. And even in the picture on the left, my first trip, I was inexperienced. I was eating very mucusy Rollinias, and but I had a lot of I had a lot of opportunities to fail and eat them overripe. So if your Rollinia looks like the one on the left when you open it, it is overripe. It's goopy. It's going to be mucusy, and it's that pulp is clear. Once the pulp has become clear and transparent, it's become oxidized. It's been off the tree too long. Immediately when you harvest a Rollinia, it starts to turn black.
You can almost watch the scales turn black. It happens that fast. Rollinia, I mean, just because of how short the shelf life is, it's definitely one of those ones that we would recommend. Like, if you're thinking of Annonas to try to, actually, I don't know if anybody's growing them out in California. Feel free to, anybody chime in. But that's one that's a great household fruit, just because you got to eat it fresh, or else it just turns into pure mush.
Yeah, so I had learned my lesson and stopped eating overripe fruits the second go around. And you can see there on the right, even though there is a lot of oxidation on that slice there from the browning, that occurred within seconds of opening the fruit. It was completely white, and you can see how the pulp is completely white. It's not transparent, and that's how you want to eat them. You can chill them for a little bit in the fridge. You can see how it has a little bit of green on it still. Very important, and you want it to be very firm. So whereas pretty much across the board, all your Annonas are soft when you harvest them and eat them, the Rollinia is not. If it's soft, it could be too far gone. You still want it to be firm to the touch.
To answer Alan, the color is what you go by. So when the whole thing turns yellow, and you can leave it like if there's a little bit of green on there, that's fine. But definitely when it's yellow, and then the black will happen after you pick it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so color is a huge thing.
Yeah, there's actually 3 different types of Rolinias in that picture on the left. There's an oblong Rolinia. There's one that's more squatty and round and fat, so it's not oblong. And then there's one on the bottom left that's spiky. So you see an extreme variation in phenotypes. These are almost exclusively grown from seed. I've never seen one grafted in my life. And I think that's because they have a tendency to atrophy limbs. Naturally, they will just atrophy limbs. It's not a tree you can just prune like other Annonas, because if you prune it, there's a chance that it will just completely atrophy and burn to the ground. But you can tip prune it while the trees are producing new growth. You can continuously tip prune them for the duration of the growth period.
There was actually it wasn't the first talk, but the first Annona talk specifically that I went to. Marshall was there as well. Harmadine gave it to the Fort Myers Fruit Club, but he mainly talked about pawpaws, but he also brought up Rolinia. But he had bred Rolinias. I'm not sure whatever happened to the genetic material, but Marshall, do you remember that? It was, I think he took one Rolinia from Bolivia, or not Bolivia,
it was
Brazil.
a large Brazilian one that wasn't any good to eat, and then like a smaller Peruvian one that was excellent in flavor.
Yeah, so then he planted both of them, and then got one that was medium-sized fruit, good flavor. So that's the only mention I've heard of people breeding Rolinias. But I mean, I think just the variations that we've seen just from the random ones in the markets, I think there's a huge potential to select different cultivars. Yeah, the one on the right, you can see just the scales, huge scales, versus some of the other ones, just I don't know, it's exciting. There's a lot of variation. And
immediately
by seeds, that's.
I immediately coined or sort of named that one on the right La Diabla, because the spikes and everything just made it look like a devil. And the size of the scales were just humongous. So that fruit that's the most exceptional Rolinia that we've found to date. And it had so few seeds in comparison to the ones on the left. I mean, you could get like up to 100 seeds in a Rolinia in the ones on the left. This one had maybe a dozen on the right, and most of them turned out to be infertile. Unfortunately, they were sterile seeds. So, as I did earlier, I just want to take like 45 seconds for the question and answer at the end. Everyone who wants to write down their questions for the end, or if you have something brief, we can cover it quickly.
Marshall, how sensitive are the chill hours for the success of the Rolinias, or really the fruit custards? People have different opinions about the importance of the chill hours in California.
You're saying chill hours in order to induce fruiting?
Correct.
I've actually never heard of that. This is not going to answer your question, unfortunately, but the trees do produce 2 crops. They'll produce a winter crop and a summer crop. So they'll hold fruit during the whole duration of their dormancy, the whole duration of the winter. And actually, we just harvested one the other day. I think it was last week. So you'll have this season right now of a light crop, and you'll have the season in the summertime when you get the heavier crop. Now, interesting to note here, and this is why I bring it up, is that the winter fruits taste better than the summer fruits. And that could have something to do with the chill hours, because I know, for example, with strawberries, that cold can cause the sugars to form and be more concentrated. So sorry that doesn't answer your question, but that is an observation from Pine Island we've seen.
So you haven't seen that less than 500 hours does not grow good apple,
No,
sugar.
absolutely. We do not get that many chill hours. We're lucky if we get 100 chill hours in a year down here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Now these are trees that benefit from a lot of water. They're endemic to the Amazon area. The tributaries, you find them along the river. It's definitely a rainforest tree. So something you want to keep in mind. That's going to be a challenge for anyone that wants to grow Rollinias, keeping them irrigated. For the gentleman who has that tree from his father or stepfather or father-in-law, this might be a good option for you because of that that body of water you have running through your property. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah, it looks like it would be a good one to grow here.
Yeah, highly recommend. In terms of flavor, I mean, I'm on the record as saying that Rollinias are better than Guanabanas or soursops. So I'm on the record saying that Rollinias are better than soursops. For any soursop fans out there. Okay, we'll continue. These so
Wait, hold on. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
So Alan mentioned the 2 seedling Rollinias, talking about grafting if they're to get more fruit. So Steve, at his wife's house, he planted, I think it was 4 or 5 different Rollinias from seed. And there were, these trees were like 14 feet tall, 15 feet tall, making tons of flowers, but they would not set fruit. And then there was a grower that he knows up in Orlando who had some 25-gallon trees, like already flowers and already fruits on them. And so when he brought one of those to the house and introduced it to the rest of them, all of them started setting tons of fruit. So I think it might just have to be, honestly, I'm not sure what it is. But for some reason, we call it Orlando's the variety. But when he brought the Orlando in, something about the flowers or the pollen of that tree specifically just encouraged all the other ones to make more fruit. Now it's just from his experience.
Thank you
So
for
it
bringing
might just
that up.
be hit or miss, luck of the draw, depending on just the seedling itself.
Yeah, and they are fairly easy to hand pollinate, but it's important to keep water on them through the dry season. So if you hand pollinate and you get a decent fruit set, that fruit set will abort if the tree's not given adequate water. Interesting observation though that Eric mentioned is this sort of group hypothesis where that 1 tree, 2 trees, or even 4 trees won't fruit unless there's a certain threshold. There needs to be like a community of trees, not just 1 tree, if you're planning on getting fruit without going out there and hand pollinating. So now we're on to Dughettias, onto a different genus. Dughettias are found exclusively in South America. Dughettia faclatus is not one that I've tried. Steve described it as being sweet. Dughettias, they actually don't have a core, that central core like Annonas have that has a conical shape. The Dughettias is a spherical shape on the inside. And that core is actually edible, unlike the Annonas. I did have the opportunity to try Margraviana, and that was not sweet whatsoever. It was actually the same flavor as like a Halloween pumpkin smells. So if you can imagine the smell of a Halloween pumpkin, that was the flavor of this fruit. It wasn't off-putting. It was definitely palatable. And you can almost see where that fruit's taken apart, how the core is spherical and not conical. these trees are extremely difficult to grow. We've killed like 90+% of the Dughettias we've attempted to grow just through lack of understanding what they need. So I encourage anyone who sees sort of the potential with Dughettias to try growing these, because the more that we can learn about how to cultivate them, the more we'll be able to preserve these species. For those of you who weren't here earlier on, we were talking about threats to Annonas globally. And when Eric and I were in South America last, which was September and October of 2019, it was actually coinciding with the massive, like, $1 trillion in damage fires that were blazing down there. So these species are highly, highly threatened species. Soy production is huge in Brazil and Bolivia, which obviously requires clear cutting of the natural habitat. Now, these do not grow in the rainforest. These grow in grasslands that are significantly dry for most of the year.
Like
So
semi grasslands.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, I forgot who mentioned it, but they were talking about the clay soil with the river. They actually might do better for you because they're native to an area where it's, the soil down there is like a visible red color from all the clay. So they actually might love it where you're at. To answer Justin, we had Dughettias. They were in 1 gallon sizes, so a lot of them were a few inches before they died. It could have just been the potting mix. It was a heavy cypress dust with peat, and just that mix, if it sits there for too long, it holds way too much water. But we've had success. I mean, I have 4 of the Dughettia on the left in the ground, and they just made it through the winter. I was covering them and watching them, but they're about this big, so they're only a few inches. Steve has one that the Dughettia on the left, we call that La Guinda because that's the name in Bolivia, but he has one that's about 3 feet, and it looks just like a stick. That looks terrible this time of year, but he amended the soil with some like North Florida clay. So I think they really like that clay soil, heavy in iron. So definitely would encourage people to try it if you're out there, if that seems like it fits your soil profile.
And here's the tree and the soil type you can see there.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's perfect.
And
but the trees, they're such stout trees. I mean, they don't get much bigger than that, which is another factor that appeals to us. Just, I mean, the physical look of the fruit itself, and then also how dwarf the trees are.
Extremely, extremely slow growing from what we understand from the local accounts. There actually, from local accounts, have been attempts to improve the species Dughettia faclatus. So we're still trying to identify where this orchard could possibly be, where they were trying to improve this fruit. If you ask the locals there, they've pretty much gone away from eating fruits from the land. They would prefer to eat a sirloin steak to a Dughettia faclatus, and that's one of the big issues, the big challenges we're facing in terms of the threatened situation of the species. It's cattle ranching, soy production, mismanagement of land, essentially. And it's so interesting to look at these trees because they're so different from Annonas in so many ways. They just look so different. If you saw it, you wouldn't even suspect that it was Annonaceae. Now, we have not come across this fruit. This is endemic to Colombia and Venezuela. Yara Yara. This is what we hear is the best tasting Bugedia that exists. This is, I believe, from the rainforest, from Las Amazonas. And it looks insane. I mean, look at how the scales are lifted away from the pulp on that picture on the left. It just looks like a Willy Wonka gobstopper or something like that. These Dugedias are just very, very mesmerizing. I could look at them all day. So Yara Yara, definitely keep that on your radar. If you're going to Colombia, you're going to Venezuela, this is supposed to be the best Dugedia that exists on the planet.
Yeah, this one, we don't have any experience trying to grow it. We have a few seeds, but we haven't planted them yet. So keep an eye out. You'll find them on Rare Palm Seeds.
Yep. And remember that clay soil is important. Iron is important. Any fruit that has red color in it or tree that has red foliage needs a lot of iron. That's how we found the most success growing any Dugedias at this point in time. And I believe this Annona, again, look at just how different of form this is. I mean, you don't see many Annonas like this. So these Annonas benefit from seasonal fires. Actually, the field that Eric is in is mowed regularly with a lawnmower. And so the Annonas are just cut to the ground every time that it's mowed, and they don't seem to mind it. They just grow right back. Now there's a couple photos here of flowers because we still have not been in country in Bolivia to actually taste this fruit. But I'll give you a general idea of what we hear from locals there. You're supposed to smell this fruit for 30 meters, which is like 150 feet out. So you smell the ripe fruit before you see the plant, before you see the fruit. And now they call it, we call it like sand sugar apple. They call it like a guanabana of the grasslands, if you translate it. Chinini de Pampa. They call guanabanas their chininis. So mountain soursop, guanabana, and this fruit here, they call them chinini. That's their word for guanabana. But on the bottom left, you can see our local contact, Teen, who sent us the photos of the fruit, the seeds, and that one in the bottom left, that's Teen there holding the fruit. These actually produce the fruit on the ground. So when the fruit gets up to size, it'll be literally sitting on the ground. And again, you smell it from 150 feet away. And that's how you know there's a ripe chinini somewhere nearby.
Yeah, where we saw most of these plants, like Marshall was talking about, heavily disturbed areas. So on the sides of the road, that were mowed down, and they sprout up, just like unlike any other Annona I've ever seen. And they say to only grow 2 to 3 meters tall max, nothing bigger than that. So, 6 to 9 feet, like at the max height. Because I think usually before then they'll get hit by some sort of natural occurring fire, or some sort of something else.
And this seemed to be very highly favored among the population. Again, we haven't been able to taste it ourselves, but by all accounts, it's something that people do actively eat. Like I was saying, that most of the people there had gone away from eating fruits of the land, but this is something they will seek out and find and consume there. So it's an exception to the rule. And you can see just by these pictures the ecosystems that the Dugedias we had just shown you from Bolivia grow in. I mean, just it's pure grassland, open areas, not a lot of large trees around, just pure bare openness. Stimulated by fires. The Dugedia faclatus is also stimulated by fires, from what we understand. And everyone, that's pretty much all of it. Annonas are like a universe all in of themselves, like a galaxy. It's just there's so many flavors, appearances. I think what attracts us all to them is that they're just mesmerizing, and the ones that we've tasted have been really good. Our family members have given us the seeds. You know, I shared a similar experience that custard apple was my favorite Annona, just because I associate it with my life partner who gave me the fruits when we originally met. And her family had introduced a strain from Cuba that we call Havana of yellow custard apple. So Annona's just, I'm so grateful you had Eric and I here to talk about them. It's something that we absolutely cherish and we've dedicated our lives to. And again, the improvement of the genus and the improvement of the order cannot be done by just a few individuals. It's going to require a network of people working together and cooperating with one another to share material and have an open network of exchange and develop something that's the world has never seen yet. So thank you for joining us. Just to label some of these here. On the left, you have Spraguei, Annona spraguei, endemic to Panama. It has a very like pine resiny flavor. It's not sweet at all. You can see the seeds are super tiny, and it literally tastes like pine resin. It's bitter, very bitter.
Definitely needs a lot of improvement as far as flavor, size, everything essentially. But yes, just we are growing it. As far as I know, there's only 2 people that have had it fruit in Florida. The first person was Steve, and then Josh Starry. I think he also fruited the spraguei. That was up in Sarasota. Yeah.
Now, looking very, very similar to the spraguei, but slightly different is Herzogii, which is the top middle. Annona Herzogii is from Bolivia. It is sweet. The seeds are about the same size as what you see in the spraguei. So if we were to open that Herzogii up, it would look pretty much just like that spraguei, but sweet. Nearly impossible to separate the pulp from the seeds, which kind of makes it very laborious and cumbersome to actually enjoy the pulp, because you're sitting there trying to separate seeds the whole time. And then there's an affiliate species of Herzogii that's smooth down there right below next to the Dugettia. So that's a smooth Annona Herzogii. They're both right now, from what I understand, labeled as affiliate species. So the taxonomy is not clear on those 2 species right now. Dugettia macgraviana. So you have seen this Dugettia, but this was more of a wild form that we found out in the bush. It was not in the prior to this, the Dugettia macgravianas you saw were grown on a residential home garden. And this one is from out in the bush. So much smaller, much more seedy, much less pulp. And then the 2 there on the right, that's actually a slice of Annona salzmanii that was given to me by Eric when we got our hands on a fruit from a local fruit collector. Annona salzmanii is a threatened species from Bahia, Brazil. And from what we understand, it tolerates very similar conditions to our native pond apple. It is compatible with pond apple rootstock. That's what this fruit was grown on. And that's that picture of the fruit's a stock photo. I did not take that photo. But Annona salzmanii is one that we're definitely trialing. It tastes like a pineapple Annona. So that tropical Annona flavor that you imagine when you imagine cherimoya or you imagine a sugar apple or an atamoya, when you bite into it, that tropical unique flavor is present in the salzmanii.
It needs improvement, but I've never tasted anything like it. I was impressed. Hardish skin, but yeah, very seedy, low pulp ratio. But the flavor was killer. And to address Alan, we have a couple poste trees, but we haven't had any success with the fruit. Steve, he said he found in Guatemala and brought back some. This was before we with him, so it was probably 6 years ago, and he said 9 out of 10 the fruits tasted terrible, but then he had one that tasted like creme brulee. So, but yeah, he said it was thick skin. You had to like saw into it and then eat it with a spoon. But just that one fruit, you know, out of all the bad ones he tried, really, he said it was worth growing just to try to get something like that. But yeah, we had a poste tree that was, I think Steve's tree at his house was like 10 feet tall. And then this year it just started dying. We don't know why. It just started dropping leaves and having a bunch of dieback. So
yeah,
and
John
that's another
Painter,
one I've heard. Go ahead.
John Painter actually grew poste to flowering, and in like a fit of rage post Hurricane Charlie, had just cut it down because it flowered year after year, flowered copious flowers, never any fruits.
Never made fruit.
It was a fit of rage that he regrets, but we know for sure he's grown it to past the juvenile stage here, to produce copious flowers. He said it would just be covered in flowers, and it was so large in the portion of the grove where it was, you couldn't see anything behind it. It was so big.
Yeah, I've actually seen the flowers at the Fruit and Spice Park down in Homestead, Florida. So on the other coast, a little more south of us, it gets more tropical over there. But I've seen I think it was originally, I don't know who brought that in. But it makes tons of flowers, like just clusters of flowers all over the entire branch. Which was that's the most mature I've ever seen, but I've never seen fruit on it. So hopefully we can get some budwood off of it, you know, and try to save it, because I mean the trees there, like when Hurricane Irma came, a lot of those trees got wrecked. So, and to address Mark's question, pond apple doesn't need to be grown in standing water. No, they can handle standing water, which is I mean, Florida originally is a swamp. The whole entire state is a huge watershed, so they're all over the place. So they do well. They're actually well suited to our dry season. So for us, we get these torrential downpours in summer, for like 3-4 months, June, July, August. Sometimes we have a wet fall as well, but then usually we have a prolonged dry season. And they seem to do fine, you know. But if so, we try to plant, like if it's going to be a low area, pond apple rootstock. If it's a little higher, more dry, we try to use sugar apple or custard apple. We haven't experimented too much with cherimoya here as far as rootstock. Zill from Zill's High Performance Plants, they love using cherimoya for atamoyas. I've heard mixed things. Half the people say cherimoya is better long term, but then I've heard people say sugar apple for us in Florida is just it's more adapted to the elevation and the climate and the soil type. So they say that's a better rootstock. So I mean, I think it's just good to have a healthy mix of both and experiment.
Namir had asked how often we fertilize custard apple and what do we use to fertilize custard apple. We'd briefly gone over this earlier, and I'd like to share again that one of the biggest challenges Annona growers face, especially getting a new tree from the nursery, is that those minor minerals run out fast. And so you might start to see your tree decline. You might start to see symmetrical symptoms in the leaf, symmetrical yellowing of the leaves. And so that's indicative that there's magnesium missing. and additionally, not only does the foliage need those minor minerals, but in order to produce fruit, Annonas will just simply not produce fruit, will not set fruit. They might flower, but they're not going to set fruit if they don't have the nutrition required to form seeds. And the nutrition required to form seeds is things like zinc and calcium. And so what you want to be using is not only fertilize like a convention. We would use organic fertilizer on a quarterly basis.
Something balanced. So
Yeah.
like 848, 12. I mean, for us here in Florida specifically, I've always been told that there's high amounts of phosphorus present in the soils. For us, we focus more on the nitrogen and the potassium because phosphorus is already abundant, Yeah.
So to get your macronutrients, use something you're accustomed to, like Eric was saying, something balanced. We prefer organic fertilizers. Like we get a 10-8 chicken manure fertilizer, but that's again not going to include any of the minor minerals that your trees are going to need to produce fruits and to produce healthy foliage. So keep in mind, you want to either have a regular quarterly or monthly application of kelp meal, which is water soluble, that can be sprayed underneath the foliage at certain times of day. And the kelp meal that Eric and I recommended that we use is a brand called Maxi Crop, MAXICROP, one word, Maxi Crop soluble kelp meal. We get that from a webpage called simplyorganic.com. It's out of California, and you could probably find it in retail stores out there, but we have to ship it over. And that's going to cover your minor mineral needs. Now, if you want to apply minor minerals to the soil, we do double up on magnesium by using Epsom salts, applying it directly to underneath the trees around the drip line. And we do use azomite as well.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, thank you. I was saying thank you. That's very helpful.
Cool. Yeah. So for us, like whenever, I'll just mix everything together. So I'll take the azomite mixed with the pelletized fertilizer, and I'll just kind of mix them up. But fertilization, it's, key in when they're not dormant, so like in the springtime when they're about to push out. Well, for us, it's, they'll go through the dry season. They look terrible every year. And then when they drop their leaves and when they're about to flush out again, that's when we'll hit them with the fertilizer and the foliar sprays during the summertime. But, definitely if you get in your rain, apply the fertilizer after the rain. That's a big thing. You want the ground to be already soaked, because if you fertilize before you get heavy rains, it's just going to run off. I didn't know that for the longest time, but it makes sense, And here in Florida, we have a lot of fertilizer runoff issues with the gated communities. So just for best practice for your environment, that's a big thing. And also, we love mulch. Like at our grove, we get truckloads of mulch from local landscapers. So we just pile up the organic matter as much as possible to supplement with everything else. So we usually try to add mulch if we're good about it. There's so many things to do, but ideally you would want to remulch every quarter, or like every 3 to 4 months. Just, keep the more organic matter, the better.
Yeah.
Just yeah, go ahead.
Make sure that mulch doesn't contact the trunk of the tree, because the decomposing agents decomposing that mulch, making it into fertile soil, will begin to decompose your tree. So make sure that mulch does not contact the tree. Is that you?
Yeah, Marshall, I want to ask you, are they deciduous trees? Because my Etimoia doesn't lose its leaves all year.
They're deciduous, but our Adamoya trees do lose their leaves. Custard apples are the ones that hold their leaves the longest here. all Annonas here are deciduous, and custard apples hold their leaves the longest. So they're still fully foliated right now. Whereas every other Annona here in Florida is already dropped all of its foliage and is about to push new. So the custard apple will drop all its foliage within the next month or so. It'll all happen at once. And the fruit will ripen up you'll be able to see all the fruit because the tree will have no leaves on it. And then all of the new growth comes at once again. And you have a lot of water spouts, which are these leaders that want to just go up and shoot to the sky, which you're going to want to keep hold of, you know?
Yeah. For us, it's, so usually it's like Atemoy so right now, Atemoyas are starting to flush out, you know, they're dropping their leaves. So depending on what we want to do to the tree and how we shape it and prune it, here in Florida, we do our pruning right before they flower, you know, so it's, the people that we've talked to with the University of Florida research down at like Trek in Homestead in their sugar apple section, they do a heavy prune in March before everything's about to flush out. So they cut off all the small branches and leave just the main thick ones, because with those branches, you'll get more energy to push flowers and new growth, you know, so that's how they get more flowers, is focusing on those thick branches, pruning everything else, and then that'll, you know, you'll get more flowers. But yeah, so usually it's like the Atemoyas, the sugar apples, and then custard apples. That's like the order of when they start to wake up. Custard apples, they always like to sleep in for the winter. So. But yeah, we've had some trees, like there's some Atemoyas, Nick, for example, he's in here somewhere, but he has an Atemoya.
He's been answering questions.
That was he had a Page Atemoya, and it was just pushing new growth the whole winter. And some of the Charlotta hybrids that we have, dark green leaves, hold every single leaf on there still. So it's the things that have the Cherimoya blood that seem to hold the leaves in the winter for us, at least here in Florida. That's what we've noticed. Because yeah, everything else usually looks terrible, like the sugar apples. And we get a lot of people here that, I mean, when we were working at Fruitscapes, a lot of retail customers, they come in and they're like, oh my God, my tree's dying. It's dropping all of its leaves. They're starting to turn brown, you know, so we just have to calm them down.
They said, I just removed my tree because it died.
Oh yeah. Oh man, there was one customer, just side note, the tree went dormant, dropped all of its leaves.
I believe it was a guanabana that they had brought in from seed from Colombia. It was a Colombian family.
Yeah. And down in Colombia, they don't drop the leaves like they do here. I mean, here, as soon as it gets into the 40s, you know, they're dropping leaves. But yeah, they cut the whole tree down, and it was still green when they cut it. They killed it.
So we do have a question from Steve that Robin shared with us about the fragrance of related Annona species. And this is something that hits home for me because smell is one of the biggest senses as an ecologist that I use to navigate natural systems, you know, and one of the things that attracts me most to them, in fact, and to Annonas in general, I mean, crush the leaves and smell them, and you just get this beautiful, like, evergreen. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's one of the best aromas I've ever smelled if you crush sugar apple leaves. And the nectar too of Atemoya is just incredible. So,
actually,
again, yeah.
Sorry, I was gonna bring up the fact that Annonaceae, I mean, y'all might be familiar with Lang Lang. That's actually in the Annona family. So they use that for Chanel No. 5, like very known brands for perfumes. So Annonas naturally have just, I mean, yeah, like Marsha was saying, just incredible smells.
Yeah, and I was under the impression for the longest time, many, many years, that Juicy Fruit gum was originally inspired by the flavor of jackfruit. But come to find out, Dr. Steve Brady, who's a fruit collector down here and works closely with Naples Botanical Garden as their sort of plant finder internationally, he introduced us to an Asian lang lang relative. It's like a twining, vining Annona. And he's telling me that that was where the ester for juicy fruit bubblegum came from.
Really?
Yeah. So we can thank Annona's for juicy fruit as well as the Lang Lang Chanel number 5. So these are perfect for the question that was asked. I think that Atamoya nectar smell or that sugar apple crushed leaf smell is transcendent through the family. You find it recurring again and again and again across species, but each species has a different twist on it. So it's there, it's hidden in the depths of the taste of the pulp and the smell of the fruits, but it can be masked sometimes by what I call like a gaminess. For example, in Sankoya, which we were able to touch on, Sankoya has a gaminess. There was only one tree in a home garden that our co-founder and partner, Steve Cucura, was able to find palatable, whereas all these that were growing in the ravine and the riparian edges of the rivers were no good at all. Same thing with poshte. We were talking about Annona scleroderma. 9 out of 10 of them are musky and too off-putting to eat, but 1 out of 10 is like creme brulee. And then pond apple, I think, is a really good representative, and even pawpaw as well, just a musky sort of gaminess, you know, that can be off-putting. And some varieties may be palatable while most of them are not. So
I'd like to add a little bit if I could.
Absolutely.
One of my classes I took from Tom Del Hotel at Southwestern College on fruiting trees and growing fruits for production and health was the final was up in the cherimoya tree. I guess I passed the course because I pruned it fairly well. But he taught us that the cherimoyas like a weeping effect, like a willow, where the humidity is kept inside, and that's what helps them to fruit and to develop a better, more, how should I say, well-rounded fruit. The second thing, my Annona, when my Atamoya, when I walk past it oftentimes, you can smell that fragrant smell, and it's not even flowering. It's amazing. It smells more than the cherimoya does, but as you walk by, there is that sweet Chanel kind of smell to it, and it's so neat. I mean, it's like tasting the fruit in a way, but in the smell. Thanks for the discussion you guys led. It was wonderful tonight.
No,
our pleasure. We've been looking forward to it.
I'm gonna write that down actually. So you said so the weeping effect to keep the humidity inside the canopy?
Yes, that's Tom Del Hotel. He was the guy was fantastic. I mean, he had different horticultural licenses. He was a pest management specialist. He worked at Home Depot in the garden department, had Fantasia Nursery of his own personal thing, but he taught at Southwestern College for years and did private consultation and stuff. But he said that the Annonas, and especially the cherimoyas, like to have the weeping leaves and everything coming over, and the fruit develops up inside of that canopy, and that humidity is what helps to develop the fruit best, and that's basically what he taught us on those trees.
Interesting. Yeah, we definitely got to try that. I mean, we did an experimentation of time. You know, I've heard a lot of people want to experiment with the idea of using. Oh, can y'all hear me? Okay, is my connection going out?
You're good.
Okay, but yeah, since Annonas, they're kind of they're really
He doesn't know anything.
like they want to experiment with espalier, you know, like growing them on trellis. But we've experimented with like tying branches down, you know, like an arc. And from that, we've just had good success for top working. So like
that's our hurricane disaster plan, is to tie the trees down.
Yeah, and tying them down, when you get the branches to bend like that, they'll shoot up and grow straight up. So it's perfect if you want to like make a cocktail
It's
tree.
almost like a menorah. Some of our trees almost look like a menorah, and you can get 8 Hanukkah candles of Adamoyas on there if you want, you know.
So, you know, I'd like to chime in, you know, as an arborist here in San Diego. Our climate is so dry compared to Florida that I'm sure that what Tom Del Hotel, who's a fellow colleague and arborist, that one of the reasons basically not to prune any subtropical fruit very much is to prevent drying out here in our essentially Mediterranean climate that is most of the year very, very dry. So, you know, it's probably in Florida, you need to create a little circulation to prevent all sorts of other kinds of environmental problems that we don't have to deal with here. We have to deal with plants drying out and totally different environmental problems. So I'm sure that that's what Dave Sohn heard from Tom. And it's true whether you're talking about avocados or citrus or virtually any subtropical plant here in Southern California. So just for the clarification.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I love to hear about it because like you said, I mean, we're pretty much in different worlds. We're like just because we usually have to deal with too much water. Yeah, like I said, in the rainy season, there'll be times where there's 6 inches of standing water on the ground, you know, just because of the rain and how flat everything is. And yeah, there are certain fungal issues like the anthracnose because of the humidity. We do have that. For us, the flowering occurs mainly in the spring, which is the driest season for us, but it gets humid really quick. So, and it's nothing like the dryness down there, I'm sure.
I think the other thing to make note of, I'm sure most of you, everybody's got to be aware that the photo periods are different from South America to North America. So winter there is summer here and spring there is fall here. And so that's why we can harvest our cherimoyas in December and January. Well, actually it's summer in South and Southern hemisphere. So, you know, I think that's another aberration that, you know, it's kind of like what you said, Eric, about people thinking their trees are dying. I've had people look at cherimoyas here in San Diego in March and go, boy, that's a really ugly tree. I said, no, it's just going dormant right now, and it'll be beautiful by the end of the summer, and it'll make fruit in December. So, you know, and I'm sensing from hearing you guys that Florida, you know, may be challenged because I think the cherimoya is a bit more drought tolerant than some of the other Annonas. And that's probably why it does a little better here and is probably more popular here, as well as being delicious. So, you know,
yeah,
I think we're all curious about all the other options that we can grow. But on the other hand, you know, hearing about the wet and humidity and all that, that's what we cannot provide, you know, really, even unless you're in a greenhouse.
Yeah, I think the balance between the two is Adamoya varieties. I think the Californians have adopted the Adamoya, and you know, there's plenty of varieties that I've heard about from out there that I've never tried, but I'm super interested in. But yeah, I want to ask, do you only get fruit one season? For us, the sugar apple season, for example, I mean, that's so like I would say the sugar apple is probably the equivalent of your cherimoya. So it's like, that's the most popular Annona, I would say.
Most acreage.
What is multiple seasons anyway?
Yeah, when I heard you say that, I was mystified. I mean, we get 2 seasons for figs, but not as far as I know. I've never heard of 2 seasons for Annona here in Southern California.
Figs are very great. That's a good thing to get 2
Yeah,
seasons. for.
like
Marshall
a
is
Brylle
huge
crop
thing.
almost.
So yeah, for us, the main season is in the flowers in the spring, and then we get the summer fruit. But if you prune the trees a certain way, so like we call it Adamoya pruning. It doesn't work for all Annonas, like Charlotta, for example. If you try to do this, it'll just ignore it. So when you have like an Adamoya branch that has all the leaves on it, for us, you know, like later in the summer, we can get away with it sometimes. Like right after we harvest the fruit, you prune all the side leaves off, and you cut the tips. Most things for us, the summer is like everything's growing super vigorous. So you cut the tips, and then you cut off all the side leaves besides, you know, maybe like 3 or 4 on top, and that'll force them to branch out, and sometimes you'll get a second flower, you know, so we can get winter set fruit that way, you know. So you reforce it to flower, and then you know, you get that
You're
winter.
getting a late crop, then.
You're just flowering over a longer period of time.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, here we have pretty benevolent weather, and we get long crops for like citrus. You can get long flowering, or even stone fruit. We can have certain varieties that will bloom over a long period and then maintain on the tree. Same with avocados.
At least 2 months or longer, it'll flower. They flower.
Yeah, I love hearing it. Because I don't know, honestly, I don't know too much about California geography or fruit growing conditions at all. So I love to hear about any of it.
Well, the biggest difference is we have warm, kind of, you know, mild winters with some moisture. And then we have almost no rain from somewhere around late April all the way to November. No rain at all.
I'm going to chime in here. We have 11 different ecological zones within San Diego. So that gives us a lot of possibilities and a wide variety climatically. So if you look at the zone information for our region, just check that out. So within miles, just miles, you'll go from 9, 10 to 11 zone. Okay. Within a range of like 5 to 10 miles at some points. So it's really, really, we have a lot of ability here in different niche ecological microclimate areas. And we can have everything from, I've been hiking in the canyons and found ferns, okay, which are great. But if you look at the chaparral, which is a ecological zone of brush that experiences mass like brush fires as part of the the plants adapted to it all. It's not, that's one of the least things you're ever going to find, you know? So, I mean, it's the most surprising. And David's nodding aggressively here. So, you know.
And Ron, I would suggest that if you don't have one already, you need a Sunset Western garden book, which will explain to you that we actually have more like 12 microclimates, and they're very distinct. And so depending on where you are in the county, we literally have a zone. You don't have to go very far to move into a different microclimate zone, and they really are different because unlike Florida, you know, you're zone 10, we used to be zone 10, and the thing is that we weren't the same as Florida. And so there was an effort to start looking at the Western United States, which is drier, and our rainfall patterns are so different that they decided to look at maybe climate zones out west as being kind of animals to themselves.
Well, that's good.
So,
because we also have sorry, please continue.
So there actually are, San Diego has some of the most diverse in the United States. And so we have, I believe at last count, at least 12 sunset zones within just our county.
Well, let's just say I'm happy with saying over 11 then. 11 or more. And then also we have a lot of different soil types as well, you know, so that in combination gives us a good broad breadth and reach as to what we can possibly plant. Mark Miner will talk your ear off about his grape research and coastal varieties of grapes and soil types and everything else. So we are fortunate to
one of the
engage
things
that level of conversation.
And it's a perfect climate for cherimoyas here.
Yeah.
Cherimoyas do very
perfect
well.
climate.
One of the
Cherimoyas
things
very
that
well.
y'all are touching on here is what motivated us to get out of country to begin with, is to find model ecosystems, model areas that emulate our climate in Florida perfectly. And that's why we started in southern Bolivia, because we knew they got Antarctic blasts that we suffer from here. And so we figured that we might find something that, and we also do have fire-prone habitat here, particularly on the west coast of Florida, southwest coast, where we're at. Now, where I grew up on the East Coast, closer to Miami, it wasn't the same story. But over here, there are fire-prone areas. So we specifically chose the areas in South America we visited to look for something that emulates our growing conditions here. And the two variables that we couldn't control were the soil type, like you were seeing the Annona dioica and the Dughettias in that clay soil, which we just do not have, sugar sand, like Eric said. And the other variable is elevation. Those photos from Bolivia that were taken about 1,000 feet of elevation. So
yeah, there's a lot depending on I mean, we're talking about a large area when you're talking about the growing range, natural growing range. So we're going to find a bit of everything, and we're going to find variants on that, which is specifically adapted to a certain ecosystem. You know, more, you know, past, you know, remnants of a river wash, for example, or a pooling or a delta coming down out of the mountains, which is going to be more sandy, less sandy, whatever have you, you know, less matter. You know, it's just trying to find the right varieties to save and preserve through cultivation in the different areas here in the West versus, you know, in North America, just so that we can enjoy them and also, you know, develop them as possible. Sunny.
And we're, just for the record, we're really more similar to Chile, which is the Mediterranean climate in South America. And it's on the western coast of that continent, just like we're on the southwestern coast of North America.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Because
we're a lot like Israel too, in a lot of ways, our Mediterranean climate.
Well, and that's the southwestern part of Europe, so.
that makes sense because Chile is the largest commercial producer of cherimoyas in the world. So
there you go.
When we're in Peru, you can tell, I mean, we stuck to like the Amazon region, like the lowlands jungle, but people were selling cherimoyas, and you can tell it was, you know, that they were getting them imported from Chile and just reselling them.
I didn't know that, but that makes sense, because they are the best Annona that grows here well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the most known species as far as like commercial production, you know.
It's delicious.
Yeah, it's great. No, it's a great fruit, which is why I think the you know, we're experimenting with a little bit. There was someone from very south of Spain in Malaga that we got some cherimoya budwood from. So we grafted it onto you know, like Adamoya or Cherolata interstock, or mine's grafted on Adamoya. But we're gonna see if we can get some flowers just for the crosses, you know, just to cross the flowers with something else to get those hybrids.
That's where Fino de Jete came from.
Yeah, exactly. So we have Fino de Jete, and then there's another one, Leon. That's what they sent us. So we're gonna see what we can do. you know.
Other than our own variety, which is Honey Heart, Fino de Jete is my personal favorite next to the one we actually grow, which is Honey Heart.
Honey Heart. I've never even heard of that. So it sounds great.
Honey Heart
Sounds
has a
delicious.
big fruit too. I mean, it can have a big heart-shaped fruit, 3 pounds.
Yep.
Yeah. That's another thing too with y'all out in California, you get bigger fruit. I think it's the elevation, you know, just causes huge fruits. For us, the Atamoyas are like half the size. So
You'll just have to come out here when they're ripening.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Take a visit to SoCal.
Yeah.
When is peak season?
December, January.
Yeah. October, November. Yeah. December.
Christmas.
Yeah.
The Christmas
Any of
fruit. It varies,
No, that's
depending on how winters and rains and other things. But
You get out there and pollinate those flowers.
and this is something that is strictly anecdotal. I have absolutely no scientific basis for it. But Steve has always pollinated the cherimoya here at our home, hand pollinated. And about the time that the Africanized honeybee showed up here in Southern California, it seemed to me that all of a sudden our cherimoyas were making fruit on their own more readily. And again, we still hand pollinate and we get better quality fruit if we do. But I really would love to see a study that when the bee was introduced, or not introduced, but arrived here in Southern California. I don't know. Do you have the Africanized bee in Florida? Because it was a noticeable change to me seeing the bees fly around and go into the flowers. Now, I've been told that they can't physically pollinate the cherimoya, but I personally don't believe that. But
They molest the male flowers, the fragrant ones.
Yeah, the leaves are so strong, from what I've understood, that the leaves are too strong. The bees couldn't get down inside to do the pollinating.
I've noticed personally that I have a lot of hummingbirds, and the hummingbirds are in that cherry moya tree all the time. So I think that's who's pollinating my cherry moya.
And the Africanized honeybee actually is a slightly smaller insect. And so most people would not know the difference. They look almost very similar to the European honeybee, neither of which are native here. But so again, I wouldn't even begin to tell you I could tell them apart, except that I knew when they arrived. But it did seem like an odd coincidence.
Marshall, you got anything on the bees? You're the bee guy.
I've personally never witnessed that. I did my senior research on plant pollinator interactions, different field sites around the county, specifically looking at what pollinators pollinate different fruit trees around here. And so I'm always I'm a very observant ecologist, like I was saying, with the aromas and pollination. These are things that drive me in etymology, and so I'm always looking out for that kind of stuff. I'll definitely be paying attention. We do have the Africanized honeybee, 100%, and there's a whole lot of people who want to get rid of them. So hopefully I'll be able to observe some Annona pollination coming up here soon. They'll be flowering for us really soon. So.
Yeah, I don't think the Africanized bees are leaving here. I mean, they've pretty much interbred and hybridized with our European bees, and the European bees aren't native either. So, I think most people here just live with it, and they do try to manage, hives if somebody has their own beekeeping operation, and they'll make sure they have a European queen. But
yeah,
otherwise, any bee can fly in.
Yeah. I just want to quickly point out that I have been putting articles in. There was a request for some articles that go into detail on experimental Annonas. So there's the one from Guerrero, Mexico, where Steve was going to go, the Llama document that I referenced. There's the article from Harmadine and Gary Zill that we talked about in terms of breeding observations. There's the Australian Custard Apple League's like 2014 publication. And I included the experimental Cherimoya field station in La Mayora, Spain. Very interesting. Save that link because it's very hard to find that link, but I'm always keeping an eye. I know they're breeding a new Cherimoya to replace Fino de Jete as we speak, because Fino de Jete makes up the most acreage in Andalusia right now. And so they're replacing that with something new that's going to be patented.
Yeah, that would be like the most thing relevant to y'all, because us, it's, you know, Cherimoyas are hit or well, mostly miss. I haven't heard any that are good, so that's something y'all should definitely keep an eye on. See if you can get some new material over there.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, everybody, if I can chime in, but Andalusia, is that not a very similar climate to San Diego? I believe it is. Anybody can confirm?
What was the question again, Ron?
It's on the Mediterranean.
The Andalusia region of Spain, is that climatically very close to San Diego? I believe it is.
Yeah. Barcelona?
Yeah, that's.
It should be identical if my memory serves.
You're very similar, I think.
Okay,
it's the agricultural powerhouse of the country. They produce the most agricultural products in that province.
So in other words, yeah, we're pretty much the same.
And this
unlike those guys in Florida.
What I just sent you, that link, they're not only the world's repository on Cherimoyas, which, you know, Spain and all their involvement in South America, they were exporting genetic material for 300 years.
Well, that's really put it in nicely.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I mean,
I'm talking about Cherimoyas.
There's a lot of different words for that.
So same thing. They are the world repository on loquats, and they're the world repository on citrus. So if you're looking for a new job, you might find an application on there and go live in Spain.
Move to Spain. To address Fang's question about fruit splitting in Florida, it doesn't happen often, like with the Ademoyas. I've seen it happen before, but it usually just depends on the rainy season. And for us, the rains, it's always different. You know, like they'll come earlier or later. Sometimes we'll have a wet winter or like a really dry winter.
You see this really often down here with jackfruits primarily. You get a jackfruit that's been experiencing like a month without any rain, and then all of a sudden, boom, you get a flash rain event, and the next day those jackfruits explode and one whole side is split open. You will see it on sugar apples primarily. So I think it has to do with the volume of rain and the dryness up to that point. So like for us, if it's really dry, which I mean, we have that extended dry season from, you know, kind of like winter through spring. But if it's super dry and then we just get an insane downpour, it just splits all the fruits. That's going to cause the splitting. Yeah.
Marshall, you were talking about the jackfruit splitting there. How big are your jackfruit getting down in Florida?
We've had them up to 80 pounds. But usually the average, I mean, somewhere from 22 to like 35. And that's if you thin the fruit set. If you want to thin the fruit set, so each tree is producing like a half dozen. If the tree has like 20 fruits on it, they're all going to be small. Yeah, the biggest one I've eaten personally was 50 pounds, and that was a Borneo red seedling. I took it to a potluck, so that was, it was a good time.
I'm curious, have either one of you connected with Dr. Ed Gilman at the University of Florida?
No, but we're interested. Ed Gilman?
Well, I have been in touch with him for many years. He's a tree guy, and I know he's interested in agricultural trees as well as ornamental trees. Done a lot of research on tree growing and agriculture in Florida and elsewhere, particularly on nursery quality. So, you know, I mean, as long as you're doing this niche work, I highly recommend you get in touch with Ed Gilman from the University of Florida. Very interesting.
I think I saw his name come up on some IFAS economic impact assessments just today, researching for the presentation.
Yeah, if you just Google trees in Florida, you'll probably come up with him. He's written, you know, he's done a lot of research, and he's nationally recognized in my circles here in the West.
Robin is quite an authority on trees, and as an arborist, she's a consultant to a lot of the cities out here, and knows her stuff. She's been and besides, she's a master gardener, been in the industry a lot of years.
Thank you, Dave.
We're in great company. And we knew we would be. We've been looking forward to this for weeks.
This is actually the first ever Rare Fruit Council talk that we've done. So y'all are the first. You're the experimental group.
Eric's the big no guy. He's the first to say no.
Yeah, we're among the fruit nerds.
The Fruit and Nut Club, right?
Yeah.
We've got a lot of fruit nerds in California, and we all have fun trying to push the limits and see what we can do. And it's a labor of love. We all enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, Steve, he actually has family. I'm not sure where in California, but he goes out there occasionally. So he's been able to try some of the Atamoyas and stuff out there while he's been out there. You remember where Steve's brother lives, Marshall?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I'm curious. Because I mean, I would love to go visit San Diego and try some of the fruit out there. So.
Now that's a connection.
Have you looked into our California Rare Fruit Growers publications or anything, or are you members of our association at all? We have a Florida chapter.
Really? No, Steve got the publication for the longest time. I mean, he had like given me a stack of them, like 4 feet high.
Yeah, no, you're. I'm not too involved, but you have a reputation for having very legit publications consistently, you know, compared to some of the other clubs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know you all have business, council business. So, I guess just wrapping up, like, is there anything that is like an elephant in the room we haven't touched, or?
I might have missed this. Soil types for Cherimoya. Preferred, I was catching iron for fruit set. You know, I'm a little bit busy, so I was distracted. Yeah. But soil types recommended, in your opinion?
For Cherimoya?
For Cherimoya, yeah. Antamoya, all the Annonias, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a broad question. I mean, we're dealing more with clay. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm using a palm and citrus mix and adding more sand to it.
Yeah. We definitely recommend something that drains well. The clay was something we were talking about in regards to Dughettias specifically to emulate the soil type they're accustomed to.
I got a real feeling that those will do very well here in San Diego.
Oh, yeah.
Just looking at the leaf pattern, just just the stature of it and its adaptations. You know, if we could get some seed, you know, from a good quality cultivar or whatever, you know, variety, I'd love to see it in one of our hands. You know, you can send it to Dave or Rob or John or somebody on our side. They'll distribute.
Yeah, absolutely. But just to answer the question, you know, you don't want anything that's going to stay soggy or stay moist.
Yeah.
That's always when we tend to have fungal blight sweep in. Minor minerals are the big thing that you did mention, Ron. So you want to have complex minor mineral as much as possible. So Eric and I use a mineral blend, you know, in the soil, like azomite. So that's going to be something you can either pre-mix in, no problem.
Yeah.
A
I
friend
was
of
gonna
ours
say what
goes
I've
by
heard.
bone meal. That's for calcium.
Most Annonas prefer slightly acidic. So like like a little below neutral, like a 6.5.
So replicating leaf fall tannic acid leaching down into the soil is biodegrade type thing. A little bit of humus.
Oh yeah, that we use a lot of that organic humic component.
Yeah, so there's a Vietnamese grower. He grows sugar apples and sapodilla. That's like his main thing. But down here, he says he doesn't even plant them in the ground. What he'll do is take the sugar apples and rest them on the soil, and then he'll pile up mulch around it. I haven't tried that. Most of the time, if we're gonna plant something, we'll do like at least halfway in the sand. Since the sand is good for us because it drains well, that's the main thing we're concerned about. And then we'll, put like ton of mulch, ton of organic matter, just sandy loam, slightly acidic, and then just amend with minerals and fertilizers.
And you're talking about drop sinking sticks in with root tone, or just getting into root, or you're talking about something that's already rooted?
Something that's already rooted when you're taking it from a container and putting it out into the field.
Sure.
Yeah, so he would take like 3-gallon, 7-gallon plants, and but yeah, most of the things we plant in the ground is usually 3 or 7 gallons.
Okay.
Annona's, one thing we didn't touch on, their root system. So they have very sensitive root systems, and
they don't regrow roots.
Yeah, so they're born with their initial set of roots, and if those break, I actually just killed it's like a 8-foot Rollinia tree because it was damaged in Hurricane Irma, and it was just had a wicked, 2017. So I had a wicked lean on it, but it was the first one I planted in my yard, so I wanted to hold on to it, so I staked it up. And it never recovered. It flowered tons of times. I hand pollinated, had 20 fruits on it, and it aborted all the fruits. Different seasons too. So in the dry season and the wet season. And somebody who we look up to a lot, Dr. Steve Brady, we mentioned him before. He worked with the Naples Botanical Garden. He gave a talk to people after Hurricane Irma, to the fruit clubs down here, and just as far as damage control, that was the whole theme of the talk, was damage control. And he was just telling people, he was like, if your Annonas got knocked over, just take them out. Which is heartbreaking, but they grow so fast anyways. It's worth it to take a damaged tree out and plant something else, just replant it.
So just a point, Eric, just a point of clarification. You say that they do not regrow the root system. So any trimming on the peripheral, let's say that there's a primary taproot or whatever.
Bullshit.
There is a primary taproot, and then there are some feeder roots towards the surface, all of which, once damaged, will not grow back. Yeah. Now I did.
So it's just a once.
No, I'm just gonna let people
I
listen.
wouldn't say anything.
I don't care if you want to say anything. It's not coming from you.
Okay, yeah.
I did lift up that Havana, the mother Havana tree blew down in Hurricane Irma, the same event, and what was required was a slow. We used 2 ladders with like a 2x6 post, and just slowly brought the tree up over several days, watering it heavily. And that worked out. That Havana tree is still with us today. So, that tree was irreplaceable. It's 14, 15 years old. And so we had to do everything we could to save it. And it's doing very well to this day. Also, with hurricanes comes a lot of debris, and so you can find wood chips readily. And so what I did was I used palm mulch that broke down super fast. And so I think between bringing it back up slowly, watering it in, and using that palm mulch that decomposed right away, it was enough of a jolt to bring the tree back to life. And it did really work.
I noticed too, when growing from seeds for cherimoyas, the taproot is essential. If you break that in any way, it stops the growth of that taproot. So even if it's just the last inch or two you break off, that's done. There can't be any breaking of that at all. So you got to be really careful with that. And that taproot goes until it finds water. So living next to the river, it doesn't have to go far, but it's already established, and it's only 2.5 years old.
Yeah, you hear this a lot from pawpaw growers up in the Northeast in Appalachia, is that they have to grow seedlings in nursery pots, very, very deep, like 18-inch forestry pots, in order for the trees to actually grow well. And Eric and I grew out a lot of pawpaws a couple seasons ago, and normal pots, and you could see how unhappy the roots were. I mean, the roots were probably 4 times the length of the actual stem of the plant. And they say with those pawpaws too that the the medicinal character of the leaf being so densely packed with nutrients and medicine comes from that really, really deep taproot being able to reach all kinds of minerals, and it's sort of like a dynamic accumulator of lots of nutrients from deep within the soil.
He said, thank you, Robin.
It's good to know that that's one of the differences here in Southern California, is that you have sandy soils. So something like—
We've got clay.
No, it's not just the clay. It's that you have deep sandy soils because of your low elevation that's basically barely at sea level, and it's essentially just beach sand. And so trees will set down a taproot in Florida and it will survive. Here, young trees set down a taproot, and when they're very young, that will hold and stabilize the tree. But as it gets older, it cannot have enough oxygen down in our soils to survive very long. So basically, no trees in Southern California have taproots to speak of. In fact, most arborists out here say that 90% of all tree roots are in the top 3 feet of the soil, and 70% are in the top 18 inches of the soil. So the idea of taproots is basically a myth in most trees around the world. I mean, Florida is probably a bit of an exception because you really do have loose sandy soils, and your trees would fall over without some measure of taproots.
It's a whole different ball game over on the East Coast where Jorge's at, just pure limestone. And Eric's right, you have to auger the holes in order to plant your trees because it's just rock over there. So we have a huge diversity in the profile.
A lot of what we have here is prehistoric, actually, depending, and this is grain of salt time, but more towards the coast, other areas, it's all river wash, prehistoric ocean bed. And so you have a lot of decomposed granite, river stone, just right below the surface. Other areas, it can be, just very hard rock, granite. It's a very complex, geography that we can have here. So it's interesting to know, locally, yes, we have shallow roots, but that's, I think, in large part, and grain of salt time, it's just motivated in part by our chaparral trying to find water immediately upon the surface. When we do get rainfall, we don't have a lot of water soaking in, and we don't have that deeper layer. So we don't have easy wells where roots can tap into it. But, whatever, maybe the plants might adapt locally, depending on the conditions. of what they find and what they need. We'll only know by experimentation.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, a huge crop where we grow, or like around us, is mangoes, and mangoes are known for their vigorous tap roots. You
We got
know,
lots of mangoes.
right? Yeah, I mean, mangoes and Annonas. It's hard to pick which one's better, but
Can I ask a quick question dating back to the Dughettias that you were talking about earlier? I was noticing that on that red one that had kind of the white flesh inside, it looked like it was coming off like little ears on the outside surface, almost like a Monstera deliciosa, how you kind of peel it back. No, further back before that one right there. If you look at the top, those little kernels almost just above the red plant with a white center, it looked like those almost peel off in individual little segments. That's very much like the Monstera does. And it just seemed like that was kind of funny that that would be the way that you would get to the fruit, was just kind of plucking those little pieces off.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Just like Monstera. Great observation.
yeah. With some varieties of sugar apples, we discriminate between good cultivars and bad kind of just random seedling cultivars by how easy the skin can peel off. So with certain types, same thing with certain types of, actually, I'm not so sure the Ademoyas, but sugar apples, there's some where you can just peel the skin off in one go, you know. Other times it's, you know, you get those scales that kind of flake off. So very reminiscent of that. But Marshall has more experience with eating the Dughettias than I do. So
Thanks for answering that. That was a kind of an intriguing question to me.
And they
yeah,
look like little poofs of like clouds almost, and they're the fruit pulp. It's just intriguing. And I mean that Yara too. I'll flip that on real quick.
Do you
And
guys
correct me if I'm wrong, but it does seem as if in every segment that there's a seed, correct? Not much pulp. It's just beautifully attractive. But yeah, those two, where would the seed be on that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So each scale, of course, each one of those little
Sections?
pods of pulp, yeah, like a carpel almost, is has a seed inside.
Rather small and thin, I would assume. Or
Yeah,
hard to tell?
they're actually entirely different from Annona seeds in their appearance. So different shape entirely. They've got more of a clunky shape to them, and I want to say I remember them being brown and not black.
Let's get our hands on some of these. What do you say, guys?
And in our experiments, gibberellic acid was necessary to germinate them. A gibberellic acid soak. I think I did it overnight or maybe for a few hours, something like that.
Scarification?
Nope.
Okay.
What ratio of acid, or for like a 99%, what ratio for water would be good?
Very weak. Doesn't need to be strong at all. So you can heavily dilute the hormone. And interestingly, all of our experiments with scarification have led to like 100% mortality. We found that they tended to be, and this is with sugar apples, but we found that they tended to be highly susceptible to fungus. They would like the fungus would just burn them as soon as they all germinated, the whole tray.
yeah, that's hard to say though. I think we need to do a little more experimentation because we're not sure if that was a product of the scarification itself or if that was just the nursery conditions that they were in. The potting mix, the irrigation cycles.
Question, did you guys have them on the surface or did you actually sink them down at all?
About a knuckle depth.
That might have been it. too. Try increasing air. Of course, just imagine that they fell within the leaf litter, so a very kind of a loose matrix, a lot of airflow maybe. Just thinking out loud, but surface. We don't know yet, but it might yield some fruit for you.
Yeah, for us, just from what I've observed, and my experience is very limited. I'm still young. I got a lot of time to play around, but timing for us is key. So like if we're planting stuff at the end of the year in fall in the winter, it doesn't want to wake up. Even if you soak them in acid, they might sprout. But we've just had a lot better success waiting, till spring. Until that. I really think that the solar radiation, the sun angle, I think that plays a huge key in sprouting, because I've heard reports of elama seeds, for example, taking over 9 months to germinate. And I planted one, it was like midsummer, I believe. And it germinated within 2 weeks. So it's just mixed results, and I feel like everybody's going to get something different.
Yeah, my own experience with South American seeds going back decades, generally, there's a lot of inhibitors you got to break down, and it all has to deal with timing, for the wet season, and get it, right for the plant. Depends on the mother plant, what it was feeling, going into it, but in general. So everything's got a story, everything's got a trick. We just need to learn, what it's asking, and then we can deliver.
Thanks for you guys' time, for your wonderful discussion, and for all of the information that you dispensed to us.
No, yeah, we thank you for the hospitality. We loved it. It was a good time. We love the feedback.
If you guys get out here, I'll give you some craft brew. San Diego, I'll take you around to the breweries. Probably some of the other people will come along with us. We might get David to stroll along.
No, that sounds great.
Look forward to the day that we can all get together. The reason we've been saying like 2019, all these different visits were in 2019 is because, we got shut out when we were in Santa Cruz for the very end of our stay in October 2019. There was actually a revolution occurring in Bolivia. We just walked into it. And Evo Morales was ultimately sent to Mexico, and there was riots in the streets. I mean, we just were out in the plaza and ended up in the middle of a 1 million person protest. So first of all, we had that, and then planning to go back, when the seeds were ready. It was like a level 4, no travel, not even for the Department of State. And then we have this whole global pandemic happening. So we really haven't been able to get back out there. So when we're looking forward to the day we can get back on a plane and visit you all, we're definitely going to add that to the itinerary down the road. Can't wait.
Yeah, I've never been out to Cali. The only place on the West Coast I've been is Seattle. So I'm excited to see a little bit more of the United States. So sounds like a good time.
They grow a lot of cherimoyas up around Santa Barbara. That area, there's a natural, it seems like, for it as well. And up San Luis Obispo, the whole Southern California, quite a growing area.
Very cool.
Well, thanks everybody. I know Dave's already signed off, but yeah, we've had largest mango. The history is long, I'll put it that way, here locally. So if we can find some remnant groves that haven't been paved over for tract housing, we'll try to show them and the remnant trees that may survive. But yeah, definitely there's something to be had here. We'd like to get the comparison contrast with people who've seen the natural growing areas to what we have here to offer and what may be a good match.
Yeah, interestingly enough, when we were in the foothills of the Andes on the first trip, we made it up to 7,000 feet in elevation. That's where I actually stumbled on those Bryllinias that had been imported from a different area of the country. The people, there was a lot of peach growing there. Pretty much the significant portion of agriculture in the area was peaches. There was a little bit of cherry moya, but when you talk to the Bolivians, they told you need to go way higher in the mountains to start seeing productive trees. So even down there at 7,000 feet, they were telling us go higher. You won't find productive trees here. It was all peach territory. So, and we found Bryllinias at that elevation on the second trip in Peru. So there's a lot to find. There's a lot to see out there. We've
It's definitely a bucket list nation. Definitely.
Well, I think that was really an eye-opening presentation, you two. I don't know.
I gotta say, Marshall put in all the legwork when it came to the presentation. I was just here for moral support. So Marshall's the MVP.
You guys are a good team. I think you go far. Yeah.
Great job.
But yeah, I think everybody should have your connections. So I think if we have questions, we can banter them back and forth and figure some of this stuff out.
Yeah, definitely. So our website is, I'll type it in the chat.
Okay.
AnnonaBreedingProject.com. It's rough right now. I mean, we're a small business. It's just us. So, you know, it's maintaining the grove, starting the nursery, doing the website. We're just juggling a bunch of things around. So
making $3 an hour.
making $3 an hour. But
I was gonna say after 7 weeks with Eric, you know, you get old. It gets old. 7 weeks straight in Peru and Bolivia.
So yeah, the website will be, you know, we'll have updates and stuff on that. We're most active on Instagram, but pretty soon we're probably going to create a Facebook, like a business Facebook. We just haven't gotten around to it yet. That's actually something we need to do. But
definitely don't hesitate to contact us, whether it's through Instagram, Annona Breeding Project, at gmail.com. I'm typing it out right now. And again, I always tell people who I get in a discussion with Annonas, is that we have to do this together. Anyone who's invested in the improvement of the genus or the order, we can't do it alone. So it's taken a team effort to get where we're at now when we have friends who are traveling. For example, we got our hands on a lot of seeds of guanabana from Bali while our friends are out there. So we're always telling our friends, you know, keep an eye out for us. And, you know, it's a reciprocal network of exchange that we want, you know.
Yeah, and it's
what I've loved most about the fruit world is that most people understand if they have something that's very unique, that they have to share it because you can lose it overnight. So most people understand that that you have to share something that's unique, or you can risk the possibility of losing it. There's only been like 2 occasions in all the sharing I've done where someone hasn't reciprocated. So that's what I love about this community the most, and what encouraged me to speak tonight.
That's what happened a little bit with Dr. Levin when he went to Israel. The state took away all of his pomegranates, and he was able to rebuild his cultivars by receiving gifts back from people that he had sent gifts to start from different areas from when he was in Russia. Interesting observation there for you.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's an incredible story. It's and it just goes to show the importance of diversifying the genetic banks. You know,
And sharing, being willing to share. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, just in natural ecosystems, you find a lot more cooperation than you would think. You know, so it's all about the network.
Well, I think if I can chime in on that, it's just we have to be increasingly aware of the effects of global warming, habitat loss, the human impact upon the ecosystems around the world. So with all species and all animals, we have to start working collectively for preservation to at least get these things distributed as widely as possible. Just because if we leave it up to the nursery system, everyone's just going to have a single peach cultivar, a single this, a single that, a single apple species, you know, variety, whatever, and we're going to lose everything that's ever been developed over thousands of years or what's in the wild. So just keeping that in mind, our job is incredibly important here as advocates for the world. That's the way I put it. Okay, but I mean, thanks guys. It's been awesome, you know, listening and learning. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. Well said. I agree.
Good night.
A pleasure. A pleasure. We'll see each other in person one of these days.
Yeah.
And like I said, don't
That'd be
hesitate.
great.
Yeah. So I got it recorded. I'm not sure how long it's going to take to put it on YouTube, but I'll be sure to send you guys a copy.
Great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool, John. Really appreciate it. Everyone, again, you know, you never know what to expect in situations like this, but I mean, the amount of interactivity was amazing. We're happy it wasn't just us chatting. We know you all are very interested in the topic. So obviously from the conversation we've had.
Now, if Marshall, if you and Eric wanted to do any write-ups or anything and send them to our editor for our Fruit Grower magazine, they would be most thankful and publish it. If you want to push your Annonas, they will. They're always looking for articles, and especially with pictures, like part of the pictures that you shared with us. If you wanted to just send a little blurb of that to our California Rare Fruit Growers magazine, they'd publish it and it'd come up in the magazine, and of course give you the credit for your articles.
Certainly, I believe that's something we'll pursue.
Yeah, we would love the contact info. Like,
we could get it from John. I believe we'll coordinate through John to branch out into the network from there.
Cool.
Yeah, I think on that newsletter we have the main corpse email. But yeah.
Okay. Cool. That's right. Everyone, best of luck in your Annona growing endeavors.
Thanks a lot again, guys.
I hope this is helpful.
And yeah, I think it's wonderful. I'll send the email too about well, just updating an email tomorrow to update everything.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, everybody. Well, that was
thanks for putting this together, John. It was a very interesting and very informative night of learning.
Yeah, they were something, huh? Man, never knew.
They were. It was wonderful. Yeah, that was great.
Out there. I don't know who's going to the pruning classes this Saturday.
I'll be there.
It's still on the road right now. We haven't got our hands on it yet. It's supposed to be on Friday, so keep your fingers crossed it makes it.
Are you talking about the pruning or grafting?
The grafting.
I'm involved with Roots Tech pretty much this weekend, and so I probably won't be heading over there.
Okay.
I'll be there. I think I'm scheduled for the 11 o'clock.
Sounds
but
good.
I'll probably show up as early as I can to catch rootstock preferred wood and just hold it over. Get
Oh,
sneaky.
Yeah.
I also want to buy some more sticks too. So yeah, whatever we can get my hands on, legitimately, I'll take. Okay.
And do we have any of the apple stock in? I mean the bare roots and the roots and the grafting pieces yet?
No, they got held up because of all the bad weather. They just got sent Tuesday, I think. So they're on the road right now, and hopefully we're getting them Friday. But
What time is the plant sale?
the plant sale is going on no matter what.
Are they gonna sell those little seedling cherimoyas too?
You know, I think we'd sell just about anything we can, Steve.
Okay, all right. I might pick up some there.
All right, sounds good.
They look like they need to find a better home.
Yeah.
Don't tell Mark that.
Yeah, he's got big plans too.
Maybe the price is right.
Yeah. But yeah, come on down. I think you're.
Oh, I got a shameless plug here. Is it okay, John?
Sure.
Okay. Those metal name tags that I had, the aluminum foil tags, I'm going to be bringing them along with me on Saturday. So if anybody wants the more durable name tags and not the little plastic name tags that come with your purchases that break real easy, I'll be selling those in groups of 50. $20 to members. How about that?
Did you say half price?
Yeah, somebody's asking about them.
Yeah, I picked those up at Anderson's also. The little Kohl's tags or whatever. They're about an inch wide by 3 inches long or something with two holes in the end.
Yeah, the ones that I have, that I went and bought, they're a little bit larger than the standard, and they come with a copper wire that's 9 inches long. So if you have to do a tree, it'll hold on a lot longer. Usually the standard ones that I found are only 6 inches for hanging the name tag, and it's thicker foil by a micron or two, you know, but they're a little bit better, I think. I paid a little bit more for it. I bought 1,000 in total. So.
Oh, that's good, Ron. Thank you.
I know that the plastic ones, for me personally, are. I didn't hear you, Dave. What was that?
I said I don't like the plastic ones, except sometimes I will.
I saw you saying it, but I wanted to hear it.
I do use, though, when I write with a pencil rather than a stylus, I do use some of the blinds. I'll take the blinds and the long blinds and cut those with a paper cutter and make them in maybe 3/4 inch or